Hello, everyone, and welcome on in to another Sherlock Holmes reading stream. Sorry we're getting started a little bit late tonight. Things got a little hectic IRL for me. Nothing terrible, but life happens. But I'm it's, I guess, strange to say, excited in a way to be doing this. That it's a calm thing. It's not an exciting, jazzy, super hyper energetic thing. But for me, it is very exciting because I do really enjoy these streams. I know that numerically, they aren't quite as popular as some of my other streams, which already aren't terribly popular. I am acutely aware of the realities of my viewership, and that does make any single person who is listening to me speak, either live or on the VOD, very meaningful to me. But even if there were nobody, even if it was just me, I do enjoy reading these stories. They're very fun. I enjoy little, semblance of voice acting that I get to do here. And it sort of helps me calm down a little bit myself. Well, Kenny King, 1234, thank you so much for the follow. Welcome on in. Or not. That was a bot. Oh well. Anyway, we're going to start with 3 short stories, and we've actually finished The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes and are now moving on to The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. This is another set of the famous Arthur Conan Doyle short stories. The illustrations I have are from Sidney Paget, the original illustrator. All of this now being in public domain. So, Louis, good to see you as well. No blueprints tonight, but if you like some other mysteries, that maybe stick around. And interestingly, The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, this is the book where you have the ending with the final problem, where, as Arthur Conan Doyle famously attempted to do, kill off Sherlock Holmes, wanting to move on to other things. But that, as many know, this is not the final installation of Sherlock Holmes. He was brought back a couple of years later, supposedly at the behest of the Crown nonetheless. But as always, little disclaimers, this is certainly a product of its time. There's one story I've chosen not to read, just very much a product of its time, more so than others, in that just I think it's a very weak mystery altogether. So we're just going to pass on that one. If you want to read it on your own, it is not the most egregious thing that came out at the time. Arthur Conan Doyle, all things considered, was actually a very open-minded person. Certainly not immune to some of the pitfalls of the era, but all said and done, he was somebody who was definitely leaning toward the much more open-minded, much more welcoming and accepting of those of all, nationalities, origins, gender, and such. But even so, I think that one of the stories just, like I said, bluntly, I just think it's a not interesting mystery. So we're going to pass. But we have, for starters, this one isn't even called The Adventure of Silver Blaze. It is just Silver Blaze. And as you'll see, it has, well, I don't know if I'd say themes of something very popular right now, but, you see that horse right there? So welcome to Sherlock Holmes Uma Musume, baby, let's go! Or not. So this is Sherlock Holmes Silver Blaze. So let me know if the music is a bit too loud. I think I've got the levels right. "I'm afraid, Watson, that I shall have to go," said Holmes as we sat down together for our breakfast one morning. "Go? Where to?" "To Dartmoor, to King's Pyland." I was not surprised. Indeed, my only wonder was that he had not already been mixed up in this extraordinary case, which was one of the topics of conversation through the length and breadth of England. For a whole day my companion had rambled about the room with his chin upon his chest and his brows knitted, charging and recharging his pipe with the strongest black tobacco, and absolutely deaf to any of my questions or remarks. Fresh editions of every paper had been sent up by our newsagent, only to be glanced over and tossed down into a corner. Yet, silent as he was, I knew perfectly well what it was over which he was brooding. There was but one problem before the public which could challenge his powers of analysis, and that was the singular disappearance of the favorite for the Wessex Cup and the tragic murder of its trainer. When, therefore, he suddenly announced his intention of setting out for the scene of the drama, it was only what I had both expected and hoped for. "I should be most happy to go with you if I should not be in your way," said I. "My dear Watson, you would confer a great favor upon me by coming, and I think that your time may not be misspent, for there are points about the case which promise to make an absolutely unique one. We have, I think, just time to catch our train at Paddington, and I will go further into the matter upon our journey. You would oblige me by bringing with you your very excellent field glass." And so it happened that an hour or so later, I found myself in the corner of a first-class carriage flying en route to Exeter, while Sherlock Holmes, with his sharp, eager face framed in his ear-flapped traveling coat, dipped rapidly into the bundle of fresh papers that had been procured at Paddington. We had left Reading far behind us before he thrust the last of them under his seat and offered me his cigar case. "We're going well," he said, looking out the window and glancing at his watch. "Our rate is present 53.5 miles an hour." "I've not observed the quarter-mile posts," said I. "Nor have I, but the telegraph posts upon the line are 60 yards apart, and the calculation is a simple one. I presume you have looked into this matter of the murder of John Straker and the disappearance of Silver Blaze?" "I have seen what the Telegraph and the Chronicle have to say." "It is one of those cases where the art of the reasoner should be used rather for the sifting of details than for the acquiring of fresh evidence. The tragedy has been so uncommon, so complete, and of such personal importance to so many people that we are suffering from a plethora of surmise, conjecture, and hypothesis. The difficulty is to detach the framework of fact, of absolute, undeniable fact, from the embellishments of theorists and reporters. Then, having established ourselves upon this sound basis, it is our duty to see what inferences may be drawn and what are the special points upon which the whole mystery turns. On Tuesday evening, I received telegrams from both Colonel Ross, the owner of the horse, and from Inspector Gregory, who is looking after the case, inviting my cooperation." "Thursday evening," I explained. "And this is Tuesday evening," I explained. "This is Thursday morning. Why didn't you go down yesterday?" "Because I made a blunder, my dear Watson, which is, I am afraid, a more common occurrence than anyone would think who only knew me through your memoirs. The fact is that I could not believe it possible that the most remarkable horse in England could long remain concealed, especially in so sparsely inhabited a place as north of Dartmoor. From hour to hour yesterday, I expected to hear that he had been found and that his abductor was the murderer of John Straker. When, however, another morning had come, and I had found that beyond the arrest of young Fitzroy Simpson, nothing had been done, I felt it was time for me to take action. Yet, in some ways I feel that yesterday has not been wasted." "You have formed a theory, then?" "At least I have got a grip of the essential facts of the case. I shall enumerate them for you, for nothing clears up a case so much as stating it to another person, and I can hardly expect that your cooperation would be there if I do not show you the position from which we start." I lay back upon the cushions, puffing at my cigar, while Holmes, leaning forward, with his long, thin forefinger checking off the points upon his palm of his left hand, gave me a sketch of the events which had led to our journey. "Silver Blaze," said he, "is from the isonomy stock, and holds as brilliant a record as his famous ancestor. He is now in his 5th year, and has brought in turn each of the prizes of the turf to Colonel Ross, his fortunate owner. Up to the time of the catastrophe, he was the first favourite for the Wessex Cup, the betting being 3-1 on him. He has always, however, been a prime favourite with the racing public and has never yet disappointed them, so that even the odds enormous sums of money have been laid upon him. It is obvious, therefore, that there were many people who had the strongest interest in preventing Silver Blaze from being there at the fall of the flag next Tuesday. The fact was, of course, appreciated at King's Pyland, where the Colonel's training stable is situated. Every precaution was taken to guard the favourite. The trainer, John Straker, is a retired jockey who rode in Colonel Ross's colours before he became too heavy for the weighing chair. He has served the Colonel for 5 years as a jockey and for 7 as a trainer, and has always shown himself to be a zealous and honest servant. Under him were 3 lads, for the establishment was a small one, containing only 4 horses in all. One of these lads sat up each night in the stable, while the others slept in the loft. All 3 bore excellent characters. John Straker, who is a married man, lived in a small villa about 200 yards from the stables. He has no children, keeps 1 maidservant, and is comfortably off. The country round is very lonely, but about half a mile to the north, there is a small cluster of villas which have been built by a Tavistock contractor for the use of invalids and others who may wish to enjoy the pure Dartmoor air. Tavistock itself lies 2 miles to the west, while across the moor, also about 2 miles distant, is the larger training establishment of Mapleton, which belongs to Lord Blackwater and is managed by Silas Brown. In every other direction, the moor is a complete wilderness, inhabited only by a few roaming Romanis. Such was the general situation last Monday night when the catastrophe occurred. On that evening, the horses had been exercised and watered as usual, and the stables were locked up at 9 o'clock. 2 of the lads walked up to the trainer's house where they had supper in the kitchen, while the third, Ned Hunter, remained on guard. At a few minutes past 9, the maid, Edith Baxter, carried down to the stables his supper, which consisted of a dish of curried mutton. She took no liquid, as there was a water tap in the stables, and it was the rule that the lad on duty should drink nothing else. The maid carried a lantern with her, as it was very dark and the path ran across open moor. Edith Baxter was within 30 yards of the stables when a man appeared out of the darkness and called her to stop. As he stepped into the circle of yellow light thrown by the lantern she saw he was a person of gentlemanly bearing, dressed in a grey suit of tweeds, with a cloth cap. He wore gaiters and carried a heavy stick with a knob on it. She was most impressed, however, by the extreme pallor of his face and by the nervousness of his manner. His age, she thought, would be rather over 30 than under it. "Can you tell me where I am?" he asked. "Can you tell me where I am?" he asked. "I had almost made up my mind to sleep on the moor when I saw the light of your lantern." "You are close to the King's Pyland training stables," she said. "Oh, indeed. What a stroke of luck," he cried. "I understand that a stable boy sleeps there alone every night. Perhaps that is his supper which you are carrying to him? Now, I am sure that you would not be too proud to earn the price of a new dress, would you?" He took a piece of white paper, folded up out of his waistcoat pocket. "See that boy has this tonight, and you shall have the prettiest frock that money can buy." She was frightened by the earnestness of his manner and ran past him to the window through which she was accustomed to handing the meals. It was already opened, and Hunter was seated at the small table inside. She had begun to tell him of what had happened when the stranger came up again. "Good evening," he said through the window. "I want to have a word with you." The girl has sworn that as he spoke, she noticed the corner of the little paper packet protruding from his closed hand. "What business have you here?" asked the lad. "It's business that may put something into your pocket," said the other. You've 2 horses in the Wessex Cup, Silver Blaze and Bayard. Let me have the straight tip, and you won't be a loser. It is a fact that at the weights Bayard could give the other 100 yards in 5 furlongs, and the stable have put their money on him. So you're one of them damn touts, cried the lad. I'll show you how we serve them in King's Pyland. He sprang up and rushed across the stable to unloose the dog. The girl fled away to the house, but as she ran, she looked back and saw that the stranger was leaning through the window. A minute later, however, when Hunter rushed out with the hound, he was gone. And though he ran all round the building, he failed to find any trace of him. One moment, I asked. Did the stable boy, when he ran out with the dog, leave the door unlocked behind him? Excellent, Watson, excellent, murmured my companion. The importance of the point struck me so forcibly that I sent a special wire to Dartmoor yesterday to clear the matter up. The boy locked the door before he left it. The window, I may add, was not large enough for a man to get through. Hunter waited until his fellow grooms had returned, and when they did, he sent a message to the trainer and told him what had occurred. Straker was excited at hearing the account, although he does not seem to have quite realized its true significance. It left him, however, vaguely uneasy, and Mrs. Straker, waking at 1 a.m, found that he was dressing. In reply to her inquiries, he said that he could not sleep on account of his anxiety about the horses, and that he intended to walk down to the stables to see that all was well. She begged him to remain at home, as she could hear the rain pattering against the window. But, in spite of her entreaties, he pulled out his Lord Mackintosh and left the house. Mrs. Straker awoke at 7 a.m. to find that her husband had not yet returned. She dressed herself hastily, called the maid, and set off for the stables. The door was open. Inside, huddled together upon a chair, Hunter was sunk in a state of absolute stupor. The favorite stall was empty, and there was no signs of his trainer. The 2 lads who slept in the chaff-cutting loft above the harness room were quickly aroused. They had heard nothing during the night, for they both were sound sleepers. Hunter was obviously under the influence of some powerful drug, as no sense could be got out of him, and he was left to sleep it off while the 2 lads and the 2 women ran out in search of the absentees. They still had hopes that the trainer had, for some reason, taken out the horse for early exercise, but on ascending the knoll near the house from which all the neighboring moors were visible, they not only could see no signs of the missing favorite, but they perceived something which warned them that they were in the presence of a tragedy. About a quarter of a mile from the stables of John Straker's overcoat was flapping from a furze bush. Immediately beyond was a bowl-shaped depression in the moor, and at the bottom of this was found the dead body of the unfortunate trainer. His head had been shattered by a savage blow from some heavy weapon, and he was wounded on the thigh, where there was a long, clean cut inflicted evidently by some very sharp instrument. It was clear, however, that Straker had defended himself vigorously against his assailants, for in his right hand he held a small knife, which was clotted with blood up to the handle, while he had in his left hand clasped a red and black silk cravat, which was recognized by the maid as having been worn on the preceding evening by the stranger who had visited the stables. Hunter, on recovering from his stupor, was also quite positive as to the ownership of the cravat. He was equally certain that the same stranger had, while standing at the window, drugged his curried mutton and so deprived the stables of their watchman. As to the missing horse, there were abundant proofs in the mud which lay at the bottom of the fatal hollow that he had been there at the time of the struggle. But from that morning he has disappeared, and although a large reward has been offered, all of the Romanis of Dartmoor are on the alert, and no news has come of him. Finally, an analysis has shown that the remains of his supper left by the stable lad contain an appreciable quantity of powdered opium, while the people at the house partook of the same dish on the same night without any ill effect. These are the main facts of the case, stripped of all surmise and stated as baldly as possible. I shall now recapitulate what the police have done in the matter. Apologies, stumbling a little bit. Fun fact, I am reading from an EPUB version of the book, and a lot of Arthur Conan Doyle's writing has inconsistent comma use. So while there are some instances where commas are there, there's a lot of sentences where you might hear me stumble that I reread, realizing, oh, there should have been a comma there. That was a partial thought or leading into something else. Inspector Gregory, to whom the case had been committed, is an extremely competent officer. Were he but gifted with imagination, he might rise to great heights in his profession. On his arrival, he promptly found and arrested the man whom suspicion naturally rested. There was little difficulty in finding him, for he inhabited one of the villas that I have mentioned. His name, it appears, was Fitzroy Simpson. He was a man of excellent birth and education, who had squandered a fortune upon the turf, and who lived now by doing a little quiet and genteel bookmaking in the sporting clubs of London. An examination of his betting book shows that bets in the amount of £5,000 had been registered by him against the favourite. On being arrested, he volunteered the statement that he had come down to Dartmoor in hopes of getting some information about the King's Pyland horses, and also about Desborough, the second favourite, which was in charge of Silas Brown at the Mapleton stables. He did not attempt to deny that he had acted as described upon the evening before, but declared that he had no sinister designs and had simply wished to obtain first-hand information. When confronted with his cravat, he turned very pale and was utterly unable to account for its presence in the hand of the murdered man. His wet clothing showed that he had been out in the storm of the night before, and his stick, which was a Penang lawyer weighted with lead, was just such a weapon as might, by repeated blows, have inflicted the terrible injuries to which the trainer had succumbed. On the other hand, there were no wounds upon his person, while the state of Straker's knife would show that at least one of his assailants must bear his mark upon him. There you have it in a nutshell, Watson, and if you can give me any light, I shall be infinitely obliged to you. I had listened with the greatest interest to the statement which Holmes, with characteristic clearness, had laid before me. Though most of the facts were familiar to me, I had not sufficiently appreciated their relative importance, nor their connection to each other. Is it not possible, I suggested, that the incised wound upon Straker may have been caused by his own knife in the convulsive struggles which follow any brain injury? It is more than possible. It is probable, said Holmes. In that case, one of the main points in favor of the accused disappears. And yet, said I, even now, I fail to understand what the theory of the police can be. I am afraid that whatever theory we state has very grave objections to it, returned my companion. The police imagine, I take it, that this Fitzroy Simpson, having drugged the lad and having in some way obtained a duplicate key, opened the stable door and took out the horse, with the intention, apparently, of kidnapping him altogether. His bridle is missing, so that Simpson must have put this on, then left the door open behind him. He was leading the horse away over the moor. Then, having left the door open behind him, he was leading the horse away over the moor when he was either met or overtaken by the trainer. A row naturally ensued. Simpson beat out the trainer's brains with his heavy stick without receiving any injury from the small knife which Straker had used in self-defense, and then the thief either led the horse on to some secret hiding place, or else it may have bolted during the struggle and now be wandering out on the moors. That is the case as it appears to the police, and improbable as it is, all other explanations are more improbable still. However, I shall very quickly test the matter when I am upon the spot, and until then I cannot really see how we can get much further than our present situation. It was evening before we reached the little town of Tavistock, which lies, like the boss of a shield, in the middle of a huge circle of Dartmoor. Two gentlemen were awaiting us in the station. One, tall, fair man with lion-like hair and a beard and curiously penetrating light blue eyes. The other, a small, alert person, very neat and dapper in a frock coat and gaiters, with trim little side whiskers and an eyeglass. The latter was Colonel Ross, the well-known sportsman. The other, Inspector Gregory, a man who was rapidly making his name in the English detective service. "I am delighted that you have come down, Mr. Holmes," said the colonel. "The inspector here has done all that could possibly be suggested, but I wish to leave no stone unturned in trying to avenge poor Straker and in recovering my horse." "Have there been any fresh developments?" asked Holmes. "I'm sorry to say that we have made very little progress," said the inspector. "We have an open carriage outside, and as you would no doubt like to see the place before night falls, we might talk it over as we drive." A minute later, we were all seated in a comfortable landau and were rattling through the quaint old Devonshire city. Inspector Gregory was full of his case and poured out a stream of remarks, while Holmes threw in an occasional question for interjection. Colonel Ross leaned back with his arms folded and his hat tilted over his eyes, while I listened with interest to the dialogue of the two detectives. Gregory was formulating his theory, which was almost exactly what Holmes had foretold in the train. "The net is drawn pretty close round Fitzroy Simpson," he remarked, "and I believe myself that he is our man. At the same time, I recognize that the evidence is purely circumstantial, and that some new development might upset it." "How about Straker's knife?" "We have come to the conclusion that he wounded himself in the fall." "My friend Dr. Watson made that suggestion to me as we came down. If so, it would tell against this man Simpson." "Undoubtedly. He has neither a knife nor any sign of a wound. The evidence against him is certainly very strong. He had a great interest in the disappearance of the favourite. He lies under suspicion of having poisoned the stable boy, and was undoubtedly out in the storm. He was armed with a heavy stick, and his cravat was found in the dead man's hand. I really think we have enough to go on before a jury." Holmes shook his head. "A clever counsel would tear it all to rags," said he. "Why should he take the horse out of the stable? If he wished to injure it, why not do it there? Has a duplicate key been found in his possession? What chemist sold him the powdered opium? Above all, where could he, a stranger to the district, hide a horse, and such a horse as this? What is his own explanation as to the paper which he wished the maid to give the stable boy?" "He says that it was a £10 note. One was found in his purse, but your other difficulties are not so formidable as they seem. He is not a stranger to the district. He is twice lodged in Tavistock in the summer. The opium was probably bought from London. The key, having served its purpose, would be hurled away. The horse may be at the bottom of one of the pits or the old mines upon the moor." "What does he say about the cravat?" "He acknowledges that it is his and declares that he had lost it. A new element has been introduced to the case, which may account for his leading the horse from the stable." Holmes pricked up his ears. We found traces which show a party of Ramonis encamped on Monday night within a mile of the spot where the murder took place. On Tuesday, they were gone. Now, presuming that there was some understanding between Simpson and the Romani, they might not have been leading the horse to them when he was overtaken. And, might he not have been leading the horse to them when he was overtaken? And may they not have him now? That is certainly possible. The moor is being scoured for these Romani. I have also examined every stable and outhouse in Tavistock, and for a radius of 10 miles. There is another training stable quite close, I understand. Yes, that is a factor which we must certainly not neglect. As Desborough, their horse, was second in the betting, they had an interest in the disappearance of the favourite. Silas Brown, the trainer, is known to have had large bets upon the event, and he was no friend of poor Straker. We have, however, examined the stables, and there was nothing to connect him to the affair. And nothing to connect this man Simpson with the interests of the Mapleton stables. Nothing at all. Holmes leaned back in the carriage, and the conversation ceased. A few minutes later, our driver pulled up at a neat little brick villa with overhanging eaves which stood by the road. Some distance off, across a paddock, laid a long grey-tiled outbuilding. In every other direction, the low curves of the moor, bronze-colored from the fading ferns, stretched away to the skyline, broken only by the steeples of Tavistock and by a cluster of houses away to the westward, which marked the Mapleton stables. We all sprang out with the exception of Holmes, who continued to lean back with his eyes fixed upon the sky in front of him, entirely absorbed in his own thoughts. It was only when I touched his arm that he roused himself with a violent start and stepped out of the carriage. "Excuse me," said he, turning to Colonel Ross, who had looked at him in some surprise. "I was daydreaming." There was a gleam in his eyes and a suppressed excitement in his manner which convinced me, used as I was in his ways, that his hand was upon some clue, though I could not imagine where he had found it. "Perhaps you would prefer at once to go to the scene of the crime, Mr. Holmes?" said Gregory. "I think that I should prefer to stay here a little and go into one or two questions of detail. Straker was brought back here, I presume?" "Yes, he lies upstairs. The inquest is tomorrow." "He has been in your service for some years, Colonel Ross." "I have always found him to be an excellent servant." "I presume that you made an inventory of what he had in his pockets at the time of his death, Inspector?" "I have the things themselves in the sitting room, if you would care to see them." "I should be very glad." We all filed into the front room and sat around the central table while the inspector unlocked a square box and laid a small heap of things before us. There was a box of Vestas, 2 inches of tallow candle, an ADP briar root pipe, a pouch of sealskin with half an ounce of long-cut Cavendish, a silver watch with a gold chain, 5 sovereigns in gold, an aluminum pencil case, and a few papers, and an ivory-handled knife with a very delicate, inflexible blade marked Weiss & Co., London. "This is a very singular knife," said Holmes, lifting it up and examining it minutely. "I presume, as I see bloodstains upon it, that this is the one found in the dead man's grasp. Watson, this knife is surely in your line?" "That is what we call a cataract knife," said I. "I thought so. A very delicate blade devised for a very delicate work. A strange thing for a man to carry with him upon a rough expedition, especially as it would not shut in his pocket." The tip was guarded by the disc of a cork which we found beside his body," said the inspector. "His wife tells us that the knife had lain upon the dressing table and that he had picked it up as he left the room. It was a poor weapon, but perhaps the best he could lay his hands on in the moment." Very possible. How about these papers? 3 of them are received hay dealer's accounts. One of them is a letter of instructions made from Colonel Ross. The other is a milliner's account for £37.15 made out by Madame Leisure of Bond Street to William Derbyshire. Mrs. Straker tells us that Derbyshire was a friend of her husband's and that he occasionally had his letters addressed here. Madame Derbyshire had somewhat expensive tastes, remarked Holmes, glancing down at the account. 22 guineas is a rather heavy amount for a single costume. However, there appears to be nothing more to learn, and we may now go down to the scene of the crime. As we emerged from the sitting room, a woman who had been waiting in the passage took a step forward and laid her hand upon the inspector's sleeve. Her face was haggard and thin and eager, stamped with the print of a recent horror. "Have you got them? Have you found them?" she panted. "No, Mrs. Straker, but Mr. Holmes here has come from London to help us, and we shall do all that is possible." Surely I met you in Plymouth at a garden party some time ago, Mrs. Straker, said Holmes. "No, sir, you were mistaken." "Dear me, why, I could have sworn to it. You wore a costume of dove-coloured silk with ostrich feather trimming." "I have never had such a dress," answered the lady. "Ah, that quite settles it," said Holmes. And, with an apology, he followed us and the inspector outside. A short walk across the moor took us to the hollow in which the body had been found. At the brink of it was the furze bush upon which the coat had been hung. "There was no wind that night, I understand," said Holmes. "None, but very heavy rain." "In that case, the overcoat was not blown against the furze bush, but placed there." "Yes, it was laid across the bush." "You fill me with interest. I perceive that the ground has been trampled upon a good deal. No doubt many feet have been here since Monday night." "A piece of matting has been laid there at the side, and we've all stood upon that." "Excellent." "In this bag, I have one of the boots which Straker wore, one of Fitzroy Simpson's shoes, and a cast of horseshoes of Silver Blaze." "My dear Inspector, you surpass yourself." Holmes took the bag and, descending into the hollow, he pushed the matting into a more central position. Then, stretching himself upon his face and leaning his chin upon his hands, he made a careful study of the trampled mud in front of him. "Hello," said he suddenly. "What's this?" It was a wax vesta, half burned, which was so coated with mud that it looked at first like a little chip of wood. "I cannot think of how I came to overlook it," said the inspector, with an expression of annoyance. "It was invisible, buried in the mud. I only saw it because I was looking for it." "What? You expected to find it?" "I thought it not unlikely." He took the boots from the bag and compared the impression of each of them with the marks upon the ground. He then clambered up to the rim of the hollow and crawled out among the ferns and bushes. "I'm afraid there are no more tracks," said the inspector. "I've examined the ground very carefully for 100 yards in every direction." "Indeed," said Holmes, rising. "I should not have the impertinence to do it again after what you say, but I should like to take a little walk over the moor before it grows dark. That I may know my ground tomorrow, and I think that I shall put this horseshoe into my pocket for luck." Colonel Ross, who had shown some signs of impatience at my companion's quiet and systematic method of work, glanced at his watch. "I wish you would come back with me, Inspector," said he. "There are several points on which I would like your advice, and especially as to whether or not we owe it to the public to remove our horse's name from the entries for the cup." "Certainly not," cried Holmes with decision. I should let the name stand." Colonel bowed. "I am very glad to have had your opinion, sir," said he. "You will find us at poor Straker's house when you have finished your walk, and we can drive together into Tavistock." He turned back with the inspector while Holmes and I walked slowly across the moor. The sun was beginning to sink behind the stables of Mapleton, and the long, sloping path in front of us was tinged with gold, deepening into rich, muddy browns, which the faded ferns and brambles caught like the evening light. But the glories of the landscape were all wasted upon my companion, who was sunk in the deepest thought. "It's this way, Watson," said he at last. "We may leave the question of who killed John Straker for the instant, and confine ourselves to finding out what has become of the horse. Now, supposing that he broke away during or after the tragedy, where could he have gone to? The horse is a very gregarious creature. If I left himself to his instincts, would more have either been... If left to himself, his instincts would have been either to return to King's Pyland or to go over to Mapleton. Why should he run upon the wild moor? He would surely have been seen by now, and why should Romani kidnap him? These people are always clear out when they hear of trouble, for they do not wish to be pestered by the police. They could not hope to sell such a horse. They would run a great risk and gain nothing by taking him. Surely that is clear. Where is he then? I have already said that he must have gone to King's Pyland or to Mapleton. He is not at King's Pyland, therefore he is at Mapleton. Let us take that as a working hypothesis and see where it leads us to. This part of the moor, as the inspector remarked, is very hard and dry, but it falls away toward Mapleton, and you can see from here that there is a long hollow over yonder, which must have been very wet on Monday night. If our supposition is correct, then the horse must have crossed that, and there is the point where we should look for his tracks. We had been walking quite briskly during the conversation, and a few more minutes brought us to the hollow in question. At Holmes's request, I walked down to the bank to the right, and he to the left. But I had not taken 50 paces before I heard him give a shout and saw him waving his hand to me. The track of a horse was plainly outlined in the soft earth in front of him, and the shoe which he took from his pocket exactly fitted the impression. "See the value of imagination," said Holmes. "It is the one quality which Gregory lacks. We imagined what might have happened, acted upon the supposition, and find ourselves justified. Let us proceed." We crossed the marshy brown and passed over a quarter-mile of dry, hard turf. Again the ground sloped, and again we came on the tracks. Then we lost them for half a mile, but only to pick them up once more, quite close to Mapleton. It was Holmes who saw them first, and he stood pointing with a look of triumph upon his face. A man's track was visible beside the horse's. "The horse was alone before," I cried. "Quite so. It was alone before. Hello, what is this?" The double track turned sharp off and took the direction of King's Pyland. Holmes whistled, and we both followed along after it. His eyes were on the trail, but I happened to look a little to one side and saw, to my surprise, the same tracks coming back again in the opposite direction. "One for you, Watson," said Holmes when I pointed it out. "You have saved us a long walk, which would have brought us back on our own tracks. Let us follow the return track." We had not to go far. It ended at the paving of asphalt which led up to the gates of the Mapleton stables. As we approached, a groom ran out from them. "We don't want any loiterers here," said he. "I only wish to ask a question," said Holmes, with his finger and his thumb in his waistcoat pocket. "Should I be too early to see your master, Mr. Silas Brown, if I were to call at 5 o'clock tomorrow morning?" "Bless you, sir, if anyone is about... There, sorry. Bless you, sir, for if anyone is about, he will be. He's always the first stirring. But here he is, sir, to answer your questions for himself. No, sir, no, it is as much my place is worth to let him see, No, sir, no, it is as much my place is worth to let him see me touch your money. Afterwards, if you like. It was a very strangely written sentence. As Sherlock Holmes replaced the half-crown which he had drawn from his pocket, a fierce-looking elderly man strode out from the gate with a hunting crop swinging over his hand. "What's this, Dave Dawson?" he cried. "No gossiping. Go about your business. Hey, you, what the devil do you want here?" 10 minutes to talk with you, my good sir," said Holmes in the sweetest of voices. "I've got no time to talk with every gadabout. We want no strangers here. Be off or you may find a dog at your heels." Holmes leaned forward and whispered something in the trainer's ear. He started violently and flushed up to the temples. "It's a lie," he shouted. "An infernal lie." "Very good. We shall argue about it here in public, or shall we talk it over in your parlor?" Sorry, I may have mistaken one for a moment. Making sure I have these voices right. Silas is the owner or the... Yes, that was Silas. I've got no time to talk to every getabout. We want no strangers here. Be off or you may find a dog at your heels." Holmes leaned forward and whispered something in the trainer's ear. He started violently and flushed to the temples. "It's a lie," he shouted. "An infernal lie." "Very good. Shall we argue about it here in public, or talk it over in your parlor?" "Oh, come in if you wish to." Holmes smiled. "I shall not keep you more than a few minutes, Watson," said he. "Now, Mr. Brown, I am quite at your disposal." It was 20 minutes, and the reds had all faded into grays before Holmes and the trainer reappeared. Never have I seen such a change as had been brought in Silas Brown in that short a time. His face was ashy pale, beads of perspiration shone upon his brow, and his hands shook until the hunting crop wagged like a branch in the wind. His bullying, overbearing manner was all gone too. He cringed along my companion's side like a dog with its master. "Your instructions will be done. I shall see it all be done," said he. "There must be no mistake," said Holmes, looking round at him. The other winced as he read menace in the eyes. "Oh, no, there shall be no mistake. It shall be there. Should I change it first or not?" Holmes thought a little, then burst out laughing. "No, don't," said he. "I shall write to you about it. No tricks now, or..." "Oh, you can trust me, you can trust me." "Yes, I think I can. Well, you shall hear from me tomorrow." He turned upon his heel, disregarding the trembling hand which the other held out to him, and we set off for King's Pyland. A more perfect compound of the bully, coward, and sneak than Mr. Silas Brown I have seldom met with, remarked Holmes as we trudged along together. "He has the horse, then?" He tried to bluster out of it, but I described to him so exactly what his actions had been upon that morning that he is convinced that I was watching him. Of course, you observed the peculiarly square toes in the impressions, and that his own boots were exactly corresponding to them. Again, of course, no subordinate would have dared to do such a thing. I described to him how, when according to his custom he was the first down, he perceived a strange horse wandering over the moor, how he went out to it, and his astonishment at recognizing, from the white forehead which was the given of the favorite in that name, that chance had put in his power the only horse which could beat the one upon which he had put his money. Then I described how his first impulse had been to lead him back to King's Pyland, and how the devil had shown him he could hide the horse until the race was over, and how he had led it back and concealed it at Mapleton. When I told him every detail, he gave it up and only thought of saving his own skin. But his stables had been searched. Oh, an old horse faker like him could make many a dodge. But are you not afraid to leave the horse in his power now, since he has every interest in injuring it? My dear fellow, he will guard it as the apple of his eye. He knows that his only hope of mercy is to produce it safe. Colonel Ross did not impress me as a man who would be likely to show much mercy in any case. The matter does not rest with Colonel Ross. I follow my own methods, and tell as much or as little as I choose. That is the advantage of being unofficial. I don't know whether you've observed it, Watson, but the Colonel's manner has been just a trifle cavalier to me. I'm inclined now to have a little amusement at his expense. Say nothing to him about the horse. Certainly not without your permission. And, of course, this is all quite a minor point compared to the question of who killed John Straker. And you will devote yourself to that? On the contrary, we both go back to London by night's train. I was thunderstruck by my friend's words. We'd only been a few hours in Devonshire, and that he should give up an investigation which he had begun so brilliantly was quite incomprehensible to me. Not a word more could I draw from him until we were back at the trainer's house. The colonel and the inspector were waiting for us in the parlor. My friend and I returned to town by the night express, said Holmes. We have had a charming little breath of your beautiful Dartmoor air. The inspector opened his eyes, and the colonel's lip curled in a sneer. So, you despair of arresting the murderer of poor Straker, said he. Holmes shrugged his shoulders. There are certainly grave difficulties in the way. I have every hope, however, that your horse will start upon Tuesday, and I beg that you will have your jockey in readiness. Might I ask for a photograph of Mr. John Straker? The inspector took one from an envelope and handed it to him. My dear Gregory, you anticipate all my wants. If I might ask you to wait here for an instant, I have a question which I should like to put to the maid. I must say I am rather disappointed in our London consultant, said Colonel Ross bluntly as my friend left the room. I do not see that we are any further than when he came. At least you have his assurance that your horse will run, said I. Yes, I have his assurance, said the colonel with a shrug of his shoulders. I should prefer to have the horse. I was about to make some reply in defense of my friend when he entered the room again. Now, gentlemen, said he, I am quite ready for Tavistock. As we stepped into the carriage, one of the stable lads held the door open for us. A sudden idea seemed to occur to Holmes, and he leaned forward and touched the lad upon the sleeve. You have a few sheep in the paddock, he said. Who attends to them? I do, sir. Have you noticed anything amiss with them as of late? Well, sir, not of much account, but 3 of them have gone lame, sir. I could see that Holmes was extremely pleased, for he chuckled and rubbed his hands together. A long shot, Watson. A very long shot, said he, pinching my arm. Gregory, let me recommend to your attention this singular epidemic among the sheep. Drive on, coachman. Colonel Ross still wore an expression which showed the poor opinion he had formed of my companion's ability, but I saw by the inspector's face that his attention had been keenly aroused. You consider that to be important? He asked. Exceedingly so. Is there any point to which you wish to draw my attention? To the curious incident of the dog in the night time. The dog did nothing in the night time. That was the curious incident, remarked Sherlock Holmes. 4 days later, Holmes and I were again in the train, bound for Winchester to see the race in the Wessex Cup. Colonel Ross met us by appointment outside the station, and we drove in his drag to the course beyond the town. His face was grave, and his manner was cold in the extreme. "I have seen nothing of my horse," said he. "I suppose you would know him when you saw him?" asked Holmes. The colonel was very angry. "I have been on the turf for 20 years, and never was such a question asked as that before," said he. "A child would know Silver Blaze, with his white forehead and his mottled-off foreleg." "How's the betting?" "Well, that's the curious part of it. You could hardly have got a 15-1 yesterday, but the price has become shorter and shorter until you can hardly get the 3-1 now." Said Holmes. "Somebody knows something. That is clear." As the drag drew up in the enclosure near the grandstand, I glanced at the card to see the entries. It ran, Wessex plate, 50 sovs each, each H. What is... Sorry, some strange notation there that I see. 50 sovereigns each, half forfeit with each 1,000 sovereigns added for 4 and 5-year-olds. Second, £300. Third, £200. New course, 1 mile and 5 furlongs. 1. Mr. Heath Newton's The Negro, red cap, cinnamon jacket. 2. Colonel Wardlaw's Pugilist, pink cap, blue and black jacket. 3. Lord Backwater's Desborough, yellow cap and sleeves. 4. Colonel Ross's Silver Blaze, black cap, red jacket. 5. Duke of Balmoral's Iris, yellow cap and black stripes. 6. Duke Singleford's Rasper, purple cap, black sleeves. "We scratched our other one and put all hopes on your word," said the colonel. "Why, what is that? Silver Blaze favorite?" 5-4 against Silver Blaze, roared the ring. 5-4 against Silver Blaze. 5-15 against Desborough. 5-4 on the field. "There are the numbers up," I cried. "They're all 6 here." "All 6 there? Then my horse is running," cried the colonel with great agitation. "But I don't see him. My colours have not passed." "Only 5 have passed. This must be he." As I spoke, a powerful bay horse swept out from the weighing enclosure and cantered past us, bearing on its back the well-known black and red of the colonel. "That is not my horse," cried the owner. "That beast has not a white hair upon its body. What is this that you have done, Mr. Holmes?" "Well, well, let us see how he gets on," said my friend imperturbably. For a few minutes he gazed through my field glass. "Capital! An excellent start," he cried suddenly. "There they are, coming round the curve." From our drag we had a superb view as they came up the straight. The 6 horses were so close together that a carpet could have covered them, but halfway up the yellow of the Mapleton stable showed to the front. Before they had reached us, however, Desborough's bolt was shot, and the colonel's horse, coming away with a rush, passed the good post 6 lengths before its rival, the Duke of Barrowmore's Iris making a bad third. "It's my race anyhow," gasped the colonel, passing his hands over his eyes. "I confess that I can make neither head nor tail of it. Don't you think you've kept up your mystery long enough, Mr. Holmes?" "Certainly, Colonel. You shall know everything. Let us go round and have a look at the horse together. Here he is." he continued as we made our way into the weighing enclosure, where only the owners and their friends find admittance. You have only to wash his face and his leg in spirits of wine, and you will find the same old silver blaze as ever. You take my breath away. I found him in the hands of a faker and took the liberty of running him just as he was sent over. My dear sir, you have done wonders. The horse looks very fit and well. It never went better in life. I owe you 1,000 apologies for having doubted your ability. You have done me a great service by recovering my horse. You would do me a greater still if you could lay your hands on the murderer of John Straker. I have done so, Holmes said quietly. The colonel and I stared at him in amazement. You've got him. Where is he then? He is here. Here? Where? In my company at the present moment. The colonel flushed angrily. I quite recognize that I am under obligations to you, Mr. Holmes, said he, but I must regard what you have just said as either a very bad joke or an insult. Sherlock Holmes laughed. I assure you that I have not associated you with the crime, Colonel, said he. The real murderer is standing immediately behind you. He stepped past and laid his hand upon the glossy neck of the thoroughbred. The horse, cried both the colonel and myself. Yes, the horse. And it may lessen his guilt if I say it was done in self-defense, and that John Straker was a man who was entirely unworthy of your confidence. But there goes the bell, and as I stand to win a little on the next race, I shall defer a lengthy explanation until a more fitting time. We had the corner of a Pullman car to ourselves that evening as we whirled back to London, and I fancy that the journey was a short one to the colonel as well as to myself as we listened to our companion's narrative of the events that had occurred at the Dartmoor training stables upon Monday night, and the means by which he had unraveled them. I confess, said he, that any theories I had formed from the newspaper reports were entirely erroneous, and yet there were indications there that they had not been overlaid by other details which concealed their true import. I went to Devonshire with the conviction that Fitzroy Simpson was the true culprit, although, of course, I saw the evidence against him was by no means complete. It was while I was in the carriage, just as we reached the trainer's house, that the immense significance of the curried mutton occurred to me. You may remember that I was distrait and remained sitting after we had all alighted. I was marveling in my own mind how I could possibly have overlooked so obvious a clue. I confess, said the colonel, that even now I cannot see how it helps us. It was the first link in my chain of reasoning. Powdered opium is by no means tasteless. Would the flavor not be disagreeable? The flavor is not disagreeable, but it is perceptible. Were it mixed with any ordinary dish, the eater would undoubtedly detect it and would probably eat no more. A curry was exactly the medium which would be able to disguise this taste. By no possible supposition could this stranger, Fitzroy Simpson, have caused curry to be served in the trainer's family that night, and it is surely too monstrous a coincidence to suppose that he had happened to come along with powdered opium on this very night when a dish just happened to be served which could disguise the flavor. That is unthinkable. Therefore, Simpson becomes eliminated from the case, and our attention centers upon Straker and his wife, the only two people who could have chosen curried mutton for supper that night. The opium was added after the dish was set aside for the stable boy, and the others had the same for supper with no ill effects. Which of them, then, had access to that dish without the maid seeing them? Before deciding that question, I had grasped the significance of the silence of the dog, for one true inference invariably suggests others. The Simpson incident had shown me that the dog was kept in the stables, and yet, though someone had been in and fetched out a horse, he had not barked enough to arouse the two lads in the loft. Obviously, the midnight visitor was someone who knew the dog well. I was already convinced, or almost convinced, that John Straker went down to the stables in the dead of night and took out Silver Blaze. For what purpose? For a dishonest one, obviously. Or why should he have drugged his own stable boy? And yet, I was at a loss to know why. There have been cases now where trainers have made some great sums of money by laying against their own horses through agents and then preventing them from winning by fraud. Sometimes it is a pulling jockey, sometimes it is a surer, subtler mean. What was it here? I hoped that the contents of his pockets might help me form a conclusion. And they did so. You cannot have forgotten the singular knife which was found in the dead man's hand, a knife which certainly no sane man would choose for a weapon. It was, as Dr. Watson told us, a form of knife which is used for the most delicate operations known in surgery, and it was to be used for a delicate operation that night. You must know, with your wide experience of turf matters, Colonel, that it is possible to make a slight nick upon the tendons of a horse's ham, and to do it subcutaneously, so as to leave no trace. A horse so treated would develop slight lameness, which would be put down to a strain in the exercise or touch of ruminism, but never to foul play. "Villain! Scoundrel!" cried the Colonel. We have here the explanation of why John Straker wished to take the horse out on the moor. So spirited a creature would have certainly roused the sleepiest of sleepers if it felt the prick of a knife. It was absolutely necessary to do it in the open air. "I have been blind!" cried the Colonel. "Of course that is why he needed the candle and struck the match." Undoubtedly, but in examining his belongings, I was fortunate enough to discover not only the method of the crime, but even of its motives. As a man of the world, Colonel, you should know that men do not carry other people's bills about in their pockets. We have, most of us, quite enough to do to settle our own. I at once concluded that Straker was leading a double life and keeping a second establishment. The nature of the bill showed that there was a lady in the case, one who had expensive tastes. Liberal as you are with your servants, one can hardly expect that they can buy 20 guineas of walking dresses for their ladies. I questioned Mrs. Straker as to the dress without her knowing it, and having satisfied myself that it had never reached her, I made a note of the milliner's address, and felt that by calling there with Straker's photograph, I could easily dispose of the mythical Derbyshire. From that time on, it was all plain. Straker had led the horse out to a hollow with his light, Straker had led the horse to a hollow where his light would be invisible. Simpson, in his flight, had dropped his cravat, and Straker had picked it up with some idea, perhaps, that he might use it in securing the horse's leg. Once in the hollow, he had got behind the horse and had struck a light, but the creature, frightened at the sudden glare, and with a strange instinct of animals feeling some sort of mischief was intended, had lashed out, and the steel shoe had struck Straker full on in the forehead. He had already, in spite of the rain, taken off his overcoat in order to do his delicate task, and so he fell, his knife gashed into his thigh. Do I make it clear? "Wonderful!" cried the Colonel. "Wonderful! You might have been there." My final shot was, I confess, a very long one. It struck me as that so astute a man as Straker would not undertake this delicate tendon-nicking without a little practice. What could he practice on? My eyes fell upon the sheet, and I asked a question which, rather to my surprise, showed that my surmise was correct. When I returned to London, I called upon the milliner, who had recognized Straker as an excellent customer by the name of Derbyshire, who had this very dashing wife with a strong partiality for expensive dresses. I have no doubt that this woman had plunged him over the head and ears in debt, and so led him into this miserable plot. "You have explained all but one thing," cried the Colonel. "Where was the horse?" "Ah, it bolted, and was cared for by one of your neighbors. We must have an amnesty in that direction, I think." This is Clapham Junction, if I'm not mistaken, and we shall be in Victoria in less than 10 minutes. If you care to smoke a cigar in our rooms, Colonel, I shall be happy to give you any other details which might interest you. And that is Sherlock Holmes, Silver Blaze. And it now has me thinking, how has there not been a Sherlock Holmes Uma Musume made? Public domain. Silver Blaze, at this point in time, as a name, I would imagine has to be, I'm not quite sure how naming rights work in the horse racing industry, but I would imagine that if something is in public domain of literature and fiction, that use of a historic name at this point is also in the public domain. Obviously, most of what is used in Uma Musume Pretty Derby is Japanese horse, but there are some international ones to my understanding. And just given the fame of Sherlock Holmes, while Silver Blaze isn't exactly the most famous Holmes story, I think that could be a very fun little adaptation. I'm going to step away for just a moment before doing the next story, but we will be right back in, really should only take me 2 minutes. All right, we are back. Also, thanks to those in chat. I did see from Zen H3 TV, Sherlock Holmes. Yes, very, very good call out. I have been using the Ace Attorney music as our BGM for these. Just a little bit of mystery music for mystery. And yes, as is famously done in the Great Ace Attorney, they use Sherlock Holmes instead of Sherlock Holmes. There are varying stories on reasons for that. Some say it was at the Holmes estate's insistence. Others say it was used as a joke from some other reference, but for whatever reason, in those games, you, as the ancestor of Phoenix Wright, get to team up with Sherlock Holmes and meet many characters with the names and influences from the original Arthur Conan Doyle canon. Very fun duology of games. If you enjoy the baseline Ace Attorney series, Great Ace Attorney is phenomenal follow-up, and I, along with many others, do dream of a day when we will see Ace Attorney 6. Maybe someday. Sega has said that they want to do stuff, and they have released ports, so maybe? Anyway, I do find it interesting that the story of Silver Blaze is just called Silver Blaze. There are so many, including our next one, for Arthur Conan Doyle, that he titled as The Adventure of blank. And others are The blank, but this is a singular short story where it is just the name Silver Blaze. Not The Adventure of Silver Blaze, not, the racehorse, it is just Silver Blaze. But for our next one, we are going to be going to one with a equally interesting name, just because it is so silly out of context, and has a, well, very interesting central set of objects, shall we say. And I'm not referring to a cardboard box. This is going to be Sherlock Holmes and the Adventure of the Cardboard Box. In choosing a few typical cases which illustrate the remarkable mental qualities of my friend Sherlock Holmes, I have endeavored, as far as possible, to select those which presented the minimum of sensationalism while offering a fair field for his talents. It is, however, unfortunately impossible entirely to separate the sensational from the criminal, and a chronicler is left in the dilemma that he must either sacrifice details which are essential to his statement and so give a false impression of the problem, or he must use matter which chance and not choice has provided him with. With this short preface, I shall return to my notes of what proved to be a strange, though a particularly terrible, chain of events. It was a blazing hot day in August. Baker Street was like an oven, and the glare of the sunlight upon the yellow brickwork of the house across the road was most painful to the eye. It was hard to believe that these were the same walls which loomed so gloomily through the fogs of winter. Our blinds were half drawn, and Holmes laid curled upon the sofa, reading and rereading a letter which he had received by the morning post. For myself, my terms of service in India had trained me to stand heat better than cold, and a thermometer at 90 was no hardship. But the morning paper was uninteresting. Parliament had risen, everyone was out of town, and I yearned for the glades of the New Forest or the shingle of the South Sea. A depleted bank account had caused me to postpone my holiday, and as to my companion, neither the country nor the sea presented the slightest attraction to him. He loved to lie in the very center of 5 million people, with his filaments stretching out and running through them, responsive to every little rumor or suspicion of unsolved crime. Appreciation of nature found no place among his many gifts, and his only change was when he turned his mind from the evildoer of the town to track down his brother of the country. Finding that Holmes was too absorbed for conversation, I had tossed aside the barren paper, and leaning back in my chair, I fell into a brown study. Suddenly, my companion's voice broke in upon my thoughts. "You are right, Watson," said he. "It does seem a most preposterous way of settling a dispute." "Most preposterous," I exclaimed, and then suddenly realizing how he had echoed the inmost thought of my soul, I sat up in my chair and stared at him in blank amazement. "What is it, Mr. Holmes?" I cried. "This is beyond anything which I could have imagined." He laughed heartily at my perplexity. "Do you remember," said he, "that some time ago, when I read you the message of one of Poe's sketches, in which a close reasoner follows the unspoken thoughts of his companion, you were inclined to treat the matter as a mere tour de force of the author. On my remarking that I was constantly in the habit of doing the same thing, you expressed incredulity. "Oh, no. Perhaps not with your tongue, my dear Watson, but certainly with your eyebrows. So when I saw you throw down your paper and enter the train of thought, I was very happy to have the opportunity of reading it off and eventually of breaking into it, as a proof that I have been in rapport with you." Wow, that's meta. I'm saying, oh yes, the idea of one character reading another character's thoughts, that's such a tour de force of the author. That is so preposterous, and then to do that in character. Silly, silly things. But I was still far from satisfied. "In the example which you read me," said I, "the reasoner drew his conclusions from the actions of the man whom he observed. If I remember right, he stumbled over a heap of stones, looked up at the stars, and so on. But I have been seated quietly in my chair. What clues can I have given you?" "You do yourself an injustice. The features are given to a man as the means by which he shall express his emotions, and yours are faithful servants." Do you mean to say that you read my train of thoughts from my features? Your features, and especially your eyes. Perhaps you yourself cannot recall how your reverie commenced? No, I cannot. Then I will tell you. After throwing down your paper, which was the action which drew my attention to you, you sat for half a minute with your vacant expression. Then your eyes fixed themselves upon your newly framed picture of General Gordon, and I saw by the alternation of your face that a train of thought had been started. But it did not lead very far. Your eyes flashed across to the unframed portrait of Henry Ward Breacher, which stands upon the top of your books. You then glanced up at the wall, and of course your meaning was obvious. You were thinking that if the portrait were framed, that it would cover just that bare space to correspond with Gordon's picture over there. "You have followed me wonderfully," I exclaimed. "So far I could hardly have gone astray, but now your thoughts went back to Beecher, and you looked hard across, as if you were studying the character in his features. Then your eyes ceased to pucker, but you continued to look across, and your face was thoughtful. You were recalling the incidents of Beecher's career. I was well aware that you could not have done this without thinking of the mission in which he undertook on behalf of the North in the time of the Civil War, for I remember your expressing your passionate indignation in the way in which he was received by the more turbulent of our people. You felt so strongly about it that I knew you could not think of Beecher without thinking of that also. When a moment later I saw your eyes wander away from the picture, I suspected that your mind had now turned to the Civil War, and when I observed that your lips set, your eyes sparkled, and your hands clenched, I was positive that you were indeed thinking of the gallantry which was shown by both sides in that desperate struggle. But then, again, your face grew sadder, and you shook your head. You were dwelling upon the sadness and the horror of useless waste of life. Your hand stole toward your own wound, and a smile quivered upon your lips, which showed that the ridiculous side of this method of settling irrational questions had forced itself upon your mind. At this point, I agreed with you that it was preposterous, and was glad to find that all my deductions had been correct. "Absolutely," said I, "and now that you have explained it, I confess that I am as amazed as before." "It was very superficial, my dear Watson, I assure you. I should not have intruded upon it upon your attention had you not shown some incredulity the other day. But I have in my hands here a little problem which may prove to be more difficult of solution than my small essay in thought reading. Have you observed in the paper a short paragraph referring to the remarkable contents of a package sent to the post to Miss Cushing of Cross Street, Croydon?" "No, I saw nothing." "Ah, then you must have overlooked it. Just toss it over to me." here it is, under the financial column. Perhaps you would be good enough to read it aloud." I picked up the paper which he had thrown back to me and read the paragraph indicated. It was headed, "A Gruesome Packet." Miss Susan Cushing, living at Cross Street, Croydon, has been made the victim of what must be regarded as a particularly revolting practical joke, unless some more sinister meaning should prove to be attached to the incident. At 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon, a small packet, wrapped in brown paper, was handed in by the postman. A cardboard box was inside, which was filled with a coarse salt. On emptying this, Miss Cushing was horrified to find 2 human ears, apparently quite freshly severed. The box had been sent by parcel post from Belfast upon the morning before. There is no indication as to the sender, and the matter is more mysterious as Miss Cushing, who is a maiden lady of 50, has led a most retired life and has so few acquaintances or correspondence that it is rare even for her to receive anything through the post. Some years ago, however, when she resided in Penge, she let her... Apologies. Some years ago, however, when she resided in Penge, she let apartments in her house to 3 young medical students whom she was obliged to get rid of on account of their noisy and irregular habits. The police are of opinion that this outrage may have been perpetrated upon Miss Cushing by these youths, who owed her a grudge and hoped to frighten her by sending these relics of the dissecting rooms. Some probability is lent to the theory by the fact that one of these students came from the north of Ireland and, to the best of Miss Cushing's belief, from Belfast. In the meantime, the matter is being actively investigated. Mr. Lestrade, one of the very smartest of our detective officers, being in charge of the case. "So much for the Daily Chronicle," said Holmes as I finished reading. "Now for our friend Lestrade. I had a note from him this morning in which he says, 'I think that this case is very much in your line. We have every hope of clearing the matter up, but we find a little difficulty in getting anything to work upon. We have, of course, wired to the Belfast post office, but a large number of parcels were handed in that day, and they have no means of identifying this particular one or remembering the sender. The box is a half-pound of honeydew tobacco and does not help us in any way. Medical student theory still appears to me to be the most feasible, but if you should have a few hours to spare, I should be very happy to see you out here. I shall be either at your house or in the police station all day. What say you, Watson? Can you rise superior to the heat and run down to Croydon with me on the off chance of a case of your annals? For your annals?" I was longing for something to do. "You shall have it then. Ring for our boots and tell them to order a cab. I'll be back in a moment when I have changed my dressing gown and filled my cigar case." A shower of rain fell while we were in the train, and the heat was far less oppressive in Croydon than in town. Holmes had sent on wire so that Lestrade, as weary, as dapper, and as fur-like as ever, was waiting for us at the station. A walk of 5 minutes took us to Cross Street, where Miss Cushing's resided. It was a very long street of 2-story brick houses, neat and prim, with whitened stone steps and little groups of aproned women gossiping at the doors. Halfway down, Lestrade stopped and tapped at a door which was opened by a small servant girl. Miss Cushing was sitting in the front room, into which we were ushered. She was a placid-faced woman, with large, gentle eyes and grizzled hair curving down upon her temples on each side. A worked antimacassar laid upon her lap, and a basket of colored silks stood upon a stool beside her. "They're in the outhouse, those dreadful things," said, wrong voice. "They're in the outhouse, those dreadful things," said she as Lestrade entered. "I wish that you would take them away altogether. So I shall, Miss Cushing. I only kept them here until my friend Mr. Holmes should have seen them in your presence. Why in my presence, sir? In case you wish to speak and ask any questions. What is the use of asking me questions when I tell you I know nothing whatsoever about it? Quite so, madam, said Holmes in his soothing way. I have no doubt that you've been annoyed more than enough already over this business. I have indeed, sir. I am a quiet woman and live a retired life. It is something new for me to see my name in papers and to find the police at my house. I won't have those things in here, Mr. Lestrade. If you wish to see them, you must go to the outhouse. It was a small shed in the narrow garden which ran behind the house. Lestrade went in and brought out a yellow cardboard box with a piece of paper and some string. There was a bench at the end of the path, and we all sat down while Holmes examined, one by one, the articles which Lestrade had handed to him. The string is exceedingly interesting, he remarked, holding it up to the light and sniffing it. What do you make of this string, Lestrade? It has been tarred. Precisely. It is a piece of tarred twine. You have also, no doubt, remarked that Miss Cushing has cut the cord with the scissors, as can be seen by the double fray on each side. This is of importance. I cannot see the importance, said Lestrade. The importance lies in the fact that the knot is left intact, and that this knot is of a peculiar character. It is neatly tied. I had already made a note of that effect, said Lestrade complacently. So much for the string, then, said Holmes, smiling. Now for the box wrapper. Brown paper with a distinct smell of coffee. What, did you not observe it? I think there can be no doubt of it. Address printed in a rather strangling character. Miss S. Cushing, Cross Street, Croydon. Done with a broad-pointed pen, probably J, and with very inferior ink. The word Croydon has been originally spelled with an I, which has been changed to a Y. The parcel was directed then by a man, the printing is distinctly masculine, of limited education and unacquainted with the town of Croydon. So far, so good. The box is a yellow half-pound honeydew box with nothing distinctive save 2 thumb marks at the left bottom corner. It is filled with rough salt of the quality used for preserving hides and other of the coarser commercial purposes. And embedded in it are these very singular enclosures. He took out the 2 ears as we spoke, and laying a board across his knee, he examined them minutely, while Lestrade and I, bending forward on each side of him, glanced alternately at these dreadful relics and at the thoughtful, eager face of our companion. Finally, he returned them to the box once more, and sat for a while in deep meditation. You have observed, of course, said he at last, that these ears are not a pair. Yes, I have noticed that, but if this were the practical joke of some students from the dissecting rooms, it would be easy for them to send 2 odd ears as a pair. Precisely, but this is not a practical joke. Are you sure of it? The presumption is strongly against it. Bodies in the dissecting rooms are injected with preservative fluid. These ears bear no sign of this. They are fresh, too. They've been cut off with a blunt instrument, which would hardly happen if a student had done it. Again, carbonic or rectified spirits would be the preservatives which would suggest themselves to the medical mind, certainly not rough salt. I repeat that there is no practical joke here, but that we are investigating a serious crime. A vague thrill ran through me as I listened to my companion's words and saw the stern gravity which had hardened his features. This brutal preliminary seemed to shadow forth some strange and inexplicable horror in the background. Lestrade, however, shook his head like a man who is only half convinced. "There are objections to the joke theory, no doubt," said he, "but there are much stronger reasons against the other. We know that this woman has led a mostly quiet life and respectable at Penge and here for the last 20 years. She has hardly been away from her home for a night during that time. Why on earth, then, should any criminal send her the proofs of his guilt, especially as, unless she is a most consummate actress, she understands quite a little of the matter as we do?" "That is the problem which we have to solve," Holmes answered, "and for my part, I shall set about it by presuming that my reasoning is correct, and that a double murder has been committed. One of these ears is a woman's, small, finely formed, and pierced for an earring. The other is a man's, sunburned, discolored, and pierced also for an earring. These two people are presumably dead, or we should have heard their story by now. Today is Friday. The packet was posted on Thursday morning. The tragedy, then, occurred on Wednesday or Tuesday earlier. If the two people were murdered, who but their murderer would have sent this as a sign of his work to Miss Cushing? You may take it that the sender of the packet is the man whom we want. But he must have some strong reason for sending Miss Cushing this packet. What reason, then? It must have been to tell her that the deed was done, or to pain her, perhaps. But in that case, she knows who did it. Does she know? I doubt it. If she knew, why should she call the police in? She might have buried the ears and no one would have been the wiser. That is what she would have done if she had wished to shield the criminal. But if she does not wish to shield him, she would give his name. There is a tangle here which needs some straightening out." He had been talking in a high, quick voice, staring blankly up at the garden fence, which now sprang briskly to his feet and walked towards the house. "I have a few questions to ask Miss Cushing," said he. "In that case, I may leave you here," said Lestrade, "for I have another small business on hand. I think that I have nothing further to learn from Miss Cushing. You will find me at the police station." We shall look in on our way to the train," answered Holmes. A moment later, he and I were back in the front room, where the impassive lady was still quietly working away at her antimacassar. Goodness. It's a small cloth placed over the back of upholstered chairs and sofas. Antimacassar. She put it down on her lap as we entered, and looked at us with her frank, searching blue eyes. "I am convinced, sir," said she, "that this matter is a mistake and that the parcel was never meant for me at all. I have said this several times to the gentleman from Scotland Yard, but he simply laughs at me. I have not an enemy in the world, as far as I know, so why should anyone play me such a trick?" "I am coming to be of the same opinion, Miss Cushing," said Holmes, taking a seat beside her. "I think that it is more than probable." He paused, and I was surprised on glancing round to see that he was staring with singular intentness at the lady's profile. Surprise and satisfaction were both for an instant to be read upon his eager face, though when he glanced round to find the cause of his silence, he had become as demure as ever. However, when she glanced round to find the cause of his silence, he had become as demure as ever. I stared hard myself at her flat, grizzled hair, her trim cap, her little gilt earrings, and her placid features, but I could see nothing which could account for my companion's evident excitement. There were one or two questions, Oh, I am weary of questions, cried Miss Cushing impatiently. You have 2 sisters, I believe. How could you know that? I observed the very instant that I entered the room that you have a portrait of 3 ladies upon the mantelpiece, one of whom is undoubtedly yourself, while the others are so exceedingly like you that there could be no doubt of the relationship. Yes, you are quite right. Those are my sisters, Sarah and Mary. And here at my elbow is another portrait taken at Liverpool of your younger sister in the company of a man who appears to be a steward by his uniform. I observe that she was unmarried at the time. You are very quick at observing. That is my trade. Well, you are quite right. But she was married to Mr. Browner a few days afterward. She was on the South American line when that was taken, but he was so fond of her that he couldn't abide to leave her for long, and he got into the Liverpool and London boats. Ah, the Conqueror, perhaps? No, the Mayday, when last I heard. Jim came down here to see me once. That was before he broke the pledge. But afterwards, he would always take drink when he was ashore, and little drink would send him stark staring mad. It was a bad day that he ever took a glass in his hand again. First he dropped me, then he quarrelled with Sarah, and now that Mary has stopped writing, we don't know how things are going with them. It was evident that Miss Cushing had come upon a subject which she felt very deeply. Like most people who lead a lonely life, she was shy at first, but ended by becoming extremely communicative. She told us many details about her brother-in-law, the steward, and then wandering off on the subject of her former lodgers, the medical students, she gave a very long account of their delinquencies, with their names and those of their hospitals. Holmes listened attentively to everything, throwing in a question from time to time. About your second sister, Sarah, he said. I wonder, since you are both maiden ladies, that you do not keep a house together. You don't know Sarah's temper, or you would wonder no more. I tried it when I came to Croydon, and we kept on until about 2 months ago when we had to part. I don't want to say a word against my own sister, but she was always meddlesome and hard to please with Sarah. You say that she quarrelled with your Liverpool relations. Yes, and they were the best of friends at one time. Why, she went up there to live in order to be near them, and now she has no word hard enough for Jim Browner. The last 6 months that she was here, she would speak of nothing but his drinking and his ways. He had caught her meddling, I suspect, and given her a bit of his mind, and that was the start of it. Thank you, Miss Cushing, said Holmes, rising and bowing. Your sister Sarah lives, I think you said, at New Street, Wallington? Goodbye. I am afraid I am very sorry that you should have been troubled over a case with which, as you say, you have nothing whatsoever to do. There was a cab passing as we came out, and Holmes hailed it. How far to Wallington? He asked. Only about a mile, sir. Very good. Jump in, Watson. You must strike while the iron is hot. Simple as the case is, there have been 1 or 2 very instructive details in connection with it. Just pull up at the telegraph office as you pass by, cabby. Holmes set off a short wire and for the rest of the drive lay back in the cab with his hat pulled over his nose to keep the sun from his face. Our driver pulled up at a house which was not unlike the one we had just quitted. My companion ordered him to wait, and his hand was upon the knocker when the door opened, and a grave young gentleman in black with a very shiny hat appeared on the step. Is Miss Cushing home? Miss Sarah Cushing is extremely ill, said he. She has been suffering since yesterday from brain symptoms of great severity. As her medical advisor, I cannot possibly take the responsibility of allowing anyone to see her. I should recommend you to call again in 10 days. He drew on his gloves, closed the door, and marched off down the street. "Well, if we can't, we can't," said Holmes cheerfully. Sorry, one moment, trying to figure out who's speaking there. They don't actually mark everything. "Perhaps she could not or would not have told you much." "Well, I did not wish her to tell me anything. I only wanted to look at her. However, I think that I may have got all that I want. Drive us to some decent hotel, cabby, where we may have some lunch, and afterwards we shall drop down upon our friend Lestrade at the police station." We had a pleasant little meal together, during which Holmes would talk about nothing but violins, narrating with great exultation how he had purchased his own Stradivarius, which was worth at least 500 guineas, at a broker in Tottenham Court for 55 shillings. This led him to a Paganini, which we sat at for over an hour, a bottle of claret, while he told me an anecdote after another anecdote of that extraordinary man. The afternoon was far advanced, and the hot glare had softened into a mellow glow before we found ourselves at the police station. Lestrade was waiting for us at the door. "A telegram for you, Mr. Holmes." "Ah, it is the answer." He tore it open, glanced his eyes over it, and crumpled it into his pocket. "That's all right," said he. "Have you found out anything?" "I have found out everything." "What?" Lestrade stared at him in amazement. "You were joking." "I was never more serious in my life. A shocking crime has been committed, and I think I have now laid bare every detail of it." "And the criminal?" Holmes scribbled a few words upon the back of one of his visiting cards and threw it over to Lestrade. "That is the name," said he. "You cannot effect an arrest until tomorrow night at the earliest. I should prefer that you do not mention my name at all in connection with the case, as I choose to be only associated with those crimes which present some difficulty in their solution. Come on, Watson." We strode off together to the station, leaving Lestrade still staring with a delighted face at the card which Holmes had thrown him. "The case," said Sherlock Holmes as we chatted over our cigars that night in our rooms at Baker Street, "is one where, as in the investigations which you have chronicled under the names of A Study in Scarlet and The Sign of Four, we have been compelled to reason backward from effects to causes. I have written to Lestrade asking him to supply us with the details which are now wanting, and which he will only get after he has secured his man. You may be safely trusted to do so, for although he is absolutely devoid of reason, he is tenacious as a bulldog once he understands what he has to do. And indeed, it is just this tenacity which has brought him to the top of Scotland Yard." "Your case is not complete, then?" I asked. "It is fairly complete in the essentials. We know who the author of the revolting business is, although one of the victims still escapes us. Of course, you have formed your own conclusions. I presume that this John Browner, the steward of the Liverpool boat, is the man who you suspect?" "Oh, it is more than a suspicion." "And yet I cannot see anything save very vague indications." "On the contrary, to my mind, nothing could be more clear. Let me run over some principal steps. We approached the case, you remember, with an absolutely blank mind, which is always an advantage. We had formed no theories, we were simply there to observe and draw inferences from our observations. What did we see first? A very placid and respectable lady who seemed quite innocent of any secret, and a portrait which showed me that she had 2 younger sisters. It instantly flashed across my mind. The box may have been meant for one of those. I set aside the idea as one which could be disproved or confirmed at our leisure. Then we went to the garden, as you remember, and we saw the very singular contents of the little yellow box. The string was of the quality which is used by sailmakers aboard ship, and at once a whiff of the sea was perceptible in our investigation. When I observed that the knot was one which is popular with sailors, that the parcel had been posted at a port, and that the male ear was pierced for an earring, which is so much more common among sailors than landsmen, I was quite certain that all the actors in the tragedy were to be found among our seafaring classes. When I came to examine the address of the packet, I observed what it is to Miss S. Channing. Now, the older sister would, of course, be... When I came to examine the address of the packet, I observed that it was to Miss S. Cushing. Now, the older sister would, of course, be Miss Cushing, and although her initial was S, it might belong to one of the others as well. In that case, we should have to commence our investigation from a fresh basis altogether. I therefore went into the house with the intention of clearing up this point. I was about to assure Miss Cushing that I was convinced that a mistake had been made when, you may remember, that I suddenly came to a stop. That fact was that I had just seen something which filled me with surprise and at the same time narrowed the field of our inquiry immensely. As a medical man, you are aware, Watson, that there is no part of the body which varies so much as the human ear. Each ear is, as a rule, quite distinctive and differs from all others. In last year's Anthropological Journal, you will find 2 short monographs from my pen upon the subject. I had, therefore, examined the ears in the box with the eyes of an expert, and had carefully noted their anatomical peculiarities. Imagine my surprise, then, when I looked at Miss Cushing and perceived that her ear corresponded exactly with the female ear which I had just inspected. The matter was entirely beyond coincidence. There was the same shortening of the pinea, the same broad curve of the upper lobe, the same convolution of the inner cartilage. In all essentials, it was the same ear. I, of course, at once saw the enormous importance of the observation. It was evident that the victim was a blood relation, and probably a very close one. I began to talk to her about her family, and you remember that she at once gave us some exceedingly valuable details. In the first place, her sister's name was Sarah, and her address had until recently been the same, so that it was quite obvious how the mistake had occurred and for whom the packet was meant. We heard of this steward married to the third sister, learned that he had at one time been so intimate with Miss Sarah that she had actually gone up to Liverpool to be near the Browners, but that a quarrel had afterwards divided them. This quarrel had put a stop to all communications for some months, so that if Bower had occasion to address a packet to Miss Sarah, he would have undoubtedly have done so to her old address. And now the matter had begun to straighten itself out wonderfully. We had learned of the existence of this steward, an impulsive man of strong ambitions. You remember that he threw up what must be a very superior berth in order to be nearer his wife, subject to occasional fits of hard drinking. We had reason to believe that his wife had been murdered, and that a man, presumably a seafaring man, had been murdered at the same time. Jealousy, of course, at once suggests that it is the most serious motive for the crime. And why should these proofs of the deed be sent to Miss Sarah Cushing? Probably because during her residence in Liverpool, she had some hand in bringing about the events which led to the tragedy. You will observe that this line of coats calls at Belfast, Dublin, and Waterford, so that, presuming that Browner had committed the deed and embarked upon at once his steamer, the Merry Day, Belfast would be the first place at which he could post his terrible packet. A second solution was that this early stage obviously possible, and though I thought it exceedingly unlikely, I was determined to elucidate it before going further. An unsuccessful lover might have killed Mr. and Mrs. Browner, and the male ear might have belonged to the husband. There were many grave objections to this theory, but It was conceivable. I therefore sent off a telegram to my friend Algar of the Liverpool force and asked him to find out if Miss Browner was at home and if Browner had departed in the May Day. Then we were on to Wallington to visit Miss Sarah. I was curious in the first place to see how far the family heir had been reproduced in her. Then, of course, she might give us a very important bit of information, but I was not sanguine that she should. She must have heard of the business from the day before, since all Croydon was ringing with it, and she alone could have understood for whom the packet was meant. If she had been waiting to help justice, she would probably have communicated with the police already. However, it was clearly our duty to see her, so we went. We found that the news of the arrival of the packet for her illness dated from that time had such an effect on her as to bring on brain fever. It was clearer than ever that she understood its full significance, but equally clear was that we should have to wait some time for any assistance from her. However, we were really independent of her help. Our answers were waiting for us at the police station, where I had directed Algar to send them. Nothing could be more conclusive. Mrs. Browner's house had been closed for more than 3 days, and the neighbors were of the opinion she had gone south to see her relatives. It had been ascertained at the shipping offices that Browner had left aboard the May Day, and I calculate that she is due in the Thames tomorrow night. When he arrives, he will be met by the obtuse but resolute Lestrade, and I have no doubt that we shall have all our details filled in. Sherlock Holmes was not disappointed in his expectations. 2 days later, he had received a bulky envelope which contained a short note from the detective and a typewritten document which covered several pages of a fool's cap. Lestrade has got him all right, said Holmes, glancing up at me. Perhaps it would interest you to hear what he says. My dear Mr. Holmes, in accordance with the scheme which we had formed in order to test our theories, we is rather fine, Watson, is it not? I went down to the Albert Dock yesterday at 6 p.m. and boarded the SS Mayday, belonging to the Liverpool, Dublin, and London Steam Packet Company. On our inquiry, there was a steward aboard by the name of James Browner, and that he had acted during the voyage in such an extraordinary manner that the captain had been compelled to relieve him of his duties. On descending to his berth, I found him seated upon a chest, with his head sunk upon his hands, rocking himself to and fro. He's a big, powerful chap, clean-shaven and very swarthy, something like Aldridge, who helped us in the bogus laundry affair. He jumped up when he heard my business, and I had my whistle to my lips when I listened to him call a couple of river police, who were round the corner, but seemed to have no heart in them. And he held out his hands quietly enough for the darbies. And he held his hands out quietly enough for the darbies. We brought him along to the cells and his box as well, for we thought there might have been something incriminating, but a big sharp knife such as most sailors have, we got nothing for our trouble. However, we find that we shall want no more evidence, for being brought before the inspector at the station, he asked to leave to make a statement, which was, of course, taken down just as he made it by our shorthand man. We had 3 copies typewritten, one of which I enclose. The general fare proves, as I always thought it would, to be an extremely simple one. But I am obliged to you for assisting me in my investigation. With kind regards, yours very truly, G. Lestrade. Investigation really was a simple one. remarked Holmes. But I don't think it struck him that in that light when he first called us in. However, we shall let us see what Jim Browner has to say for himself. This is the statement as he made before Inspector Montgomery at the Shadwell police station, and it has the advantage of being verbatim. Sorry, one moment. Let me... Much slow in this one. Give me just a moment. I need to get some water. My throat's going a little bit. apologies for the abrupt BRB. I talk enough to know when my voice is getting a little bit uncomfortable and want to correct that as quickly as possible. Fortunately, I also know my voice and just what to use to prevent any issues. I use a syrup called Ninjong Pepekwa, which was recommended to me by a very good friend who does professional voice acting. It is something I absolutely swear by. Hashtag not sponsored, but hashtag boy would I take that sponsorship. Now then, let us resume, shall we? The investigation really was a simple one, remarked Holmes, but I don't think it struck him in that light when he first called us in. However, let us see what Mr. Jim Browner has to say for himself. This is his statement as was made before Inspector Montgomery at the Shadwell police station, and it has the advantage of being verbatim. Have I anything to say? Yes, I have a deal to say. I have to make a clean breast of it all. You can hang me or you can leave me alone. I don't care a plug which you do. I tell you, I've not shut an eye in sleep since I did it, and I don't believe I will ever again until I get past all waking. Sometimes it's his face, but most generally it's hers. I'm never without one or the other before me. He looks frowning and black-like, but she has a kind of surprise upon her face. I, the white lamb, she might well be surprised when she can read death on a face that had seldom looked anything but love upon her before. But it was Sarah's fault, and may the curse of a broken man put a blight on her and set the blood rotting in her veins. It's not that I want to clear myself. I know that I went back to drink like the beast that I was, but she would have forgiven me. She would have struck as close to me as a rope to a block if that woman had never darkened our door. For Sarah Cushing loved me. That's the root of the business. She loved me until all her love turned to poisonous hate, which she knew I thought more of than my wife's footmark in the mud than I did of her whole body and soul. There were 3 sisters altogether. The old one was just a good woman, the second was a devil, and the third was an angel. Sarah was 33 and Mary was 29 when I married. We were just as happy as the day was long when we set up house together, and in all Liverpool there was no better woman than my Mary. And then we asked Sarah up for a week, and the week grew into a month, and one thing led to another, until she was just one of ourselves. I was blue ribbon at that time, and we were putting a little money by, and all was bright as a new dollar. My God, what I would have thought that it could have come to this. Whoever could have dreamed it? I used to be home for the weekends very often, and sometimes, if the ship were held for cargo, I would have a whole week at a time. And in this way, I saw a great deal of my sister-in-law, Sarah. She was a fine, tall woman, black and quick and fierce, with a proud way of carrying her head and a glint from her eye like a spark from a flint. But when little Mary was there, I never had thought of her. But when little Mary was there, I had never a thought of her, and that I swear as I hope for God's mercy. It had seemed to me sometimes that she liked to be alone with me, or to coax me out for a walk with her, but I never thought anything of that. But one evening my eyes were opened. I had come up from the ship and had found my wife out, but Sarah at home. "Where's Mary?" I asked. "Oh, she has gone to pay some accounts." I was impatient and paced up and down the room. "Can't you be happy for 5 minutes without Mary, Jim?" says she. "It's a bad compliment to me that you can't contend with my society for so short a time." "That's all right, my lass," said I, putting out my hand toward her in a kindly way, but she had it in both hers in an instant, and they burned as if they were in fever. I looked into her eyes and I read it all there. There was no need for her to speak, nor for me to either. I frowned and drew my hand away. Then she stood by my side in silence for a bit, and then put her hand and patted me on the shoulder. "Steady, old Jim," she said, with a kind of mocking laugh as she ran out of the room. Well, from that time Sarah hated me with her whole heart and soul, and she is a woman who can hate too. I was a fool to let her go on bidding with us, a besotted fool. But I never said a word to Mary, for I knew it would grieve her. Things went on much as before, but after a time I began to find that there was a bit of a change in Mary herself. She had always been so trusting and so innocent, but now she became queer and suspicious, wanting to know where I had been and what I had been doing, and whom my letters were from, and what I had in my pockets, and 1,000 such follies. Day by day she grew queerer and more irritable, and we had ceaseless rows about nothing. I was fairly puzzled by it all. Sarah avoided me now, but she and Mary were just inseparable. I can see now how she was plotting and scheming and poisoning my wife's mind against me. But I was such a blind beetle that I could not understand it at the time. And I broke my blue ribbon and began to drink again. But I think I should not have done it if Mary had been the same as ever. She had, for some reason, become disgusted with me now, and the gap between us began to become wider and wider. And then this Alec Fairbairn, 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 Alec Fairbairn chipped in, and things became 1,000 times blacker. It was to see Sarah that he came to my house first, but soon it was to see us, for he was a man with winning ways. And we made friends wherever, and he made friends wherever he went. He was a dashing, swaggering chap, smart and curled, who had seen half the world and could talk of what he had seen. He was good company, I won't deny it, and he had a wonderful polite way with him for a sailor man, so that I think there must have been a time when he knew more of the poop than the forecastle. For a month he was in and out of my house, and never once did it cross my mind that harm might come of his soft, tricky ways. And then, at last, something made me suspect, and from that day my peace was gone forever. It was only a little thing, too. I had come into the parlor unexpected, and as I walked in the door I saw a light out of my I saw a light of welcome on my wife's face. But as she saw who it was, it faded again, and she turned away with a look of disappointment. That was enough for me. There was no one but Alec Fairbairn whose step she could have mistaken for mine. If I could have seen him, then I should have killed him, for I have always been like a madman when my temper gets loose. Mary saw the devil's light in my eyes, and she ran forward with her hands on my sleeve. "Don't, Jim, don't," she said. "Where's Sarah?" I asked. "In the kitchen," says she. "Sarah," says I as I went in, "this man Fairbairn is never to darken my door again." "Why not?" says she. "Because I order it." "Oh," says she. "If my friends are not good enough for this house, then I am not good enough for it either." "You can do what you like," says I, "but if Fairbairn shows his face here again, I'll send you one of his ears for a keepsake." She was frightened by my face, I think, for she never answered a word. The same evening, she left my house. Well, I don't know now whether it was pure devilry on the part of this woman, or whether she thought that she could turn me against my wife by encouraging her to misbehave. Anyway, she took a house just 2 streets off and let lodgings to sailors. Fairbairn used to stay there, and Mary would go round to have tea with her sister and him. How often she went I don't know, but I followed her one day, and as I broke in at the door, Fairbairn got away over the back garden wall like the cowardly skunk that he was. I swore to my wife that I would kill her if I found her in his company again, and I led her back with me, sobbing and trembling, as white as a piece of paper. There was no trace of love between us any longer. I could see that she hated me and feared me, and the thought of it drove me to drink, and she despised me as well. Well, Sarah found that she could not make a living in Liverpool, so she went back, as I understand, to live with her sister in Croydon, and things jogged on much the same as ever at our home. And then came this last week, and all the misery and ruin. It was in this way. We had gone on the May Day for a round voyage of 7 days, but a hogshead got loose and started one of our plates, so it had to be put back in the port for 12 hours. I left the ship and came home, thinking what a surprise it would be for my wife, and hoping that maybe she would be glad to see me so soon. The thought was in my head as I turned onto my street, and at the moment, a cab passed me, and there she was, sitting by the side of Fairbairn, two chatting and laughing with never a thought for me as I stood watching them from the footpath. I tell you, I'll give you my word for it, that from that moment, I was not my own master. It was all like a dim dream when I look back on it. I had been drinking hard of late, and the two things together fairly turned my brain. There's something throbbing in my head now, like a docker's hammer. But that morning I seemed to have all Niagara whizzing and buzzing in my ears. Well, I took to my heels, and I ran after the cab. I had a heavy oak stick in my hand, and I tell you I saw red from the first. But as I ran I got cunning too, and I hung back a little to see them without being seen. They pulled up soon at a railway station. There was a good crowd round the booking office, so I got close to them without being seen. They took tickets for New Brighton, so did I, but I got in 3 carriages behind them. When we reached it, they walked along the parade, and I was never more than 100 yards from them. At last I saw them hire a boat and start for a row, for it was a very hot day, and they thought no doubt that it would be cooler on the water. It was just as if they had been given into my hands. There was a bit of haze, and you could not see more than a few hundred yards. I hired a boat for myself, and I pulled after them. I could see the blur of their craft, but they were nearly going as fast as I. They might have been a long mile from the shore when I caught up to them. The haze was like a curtain all round us, and there were we 3 in the middle of it. My God, shall I ever forget their faces when they saw who was in the boat that was closing in upon them? They screamed out. She screamed out. He swore like a madman and jabbed at me with an oar, for he must have seen death in my eyes. I got past it, and got one with my stick that crushed his head like an egg. I would have spared her, perhaps, for all my madness, but she threw her arms round him, crying out to him and calling Alec. I struck again, and she lay stretched beside him. I was like a wild beast then that had tasted blood. If Sarah had been there, by the Lord, she would have joined them. I pulled out my knife and, well, there. I've said enough. It gave me a kind of savage joy when I thought of how Sarah might feel when she had such signs as these of what her meddling had brought about, and I tied the bodies to the boat, stove a plank, and stood by it until they sunk. I knew very well that the owner would think that they had lost their bearings in the haze and had drifted out to sea. I cleaned myself up, got back to land, and joined my ship without having a soul suspect what had passed. That night, I made up the packet for Sarah Cushing. The next day, I sent it from Belfast. There you have the whole truth of it. You can hang me, or do what you like with me. but you cannot punish me as I have been punished already. I cannot shut my eyes, but I see those two faces staring at me as they stared when my boat broke through the haze. Killed them quick, but they are killing me slow. And if I have another night of it, I shall be either mad or dead before morning. You won't put me alone into a cell, sir. For pity's sake, don't. You be treated in your day of agony as you treat me now. What is the meaning of it, Watson? Said Holmes solemnly as he laid the paper down. What object is served by this circle of misery and violence and fear? It must tend to some end, or else our universe is ruled by chance, which is untenable, which is unthinkable. But what end? There is the great standing perennial problem to which human reason is as far as from an answer as ever. And that is Sherlock Holmes and the Adventure of the Cardboard Box. So interesting to think in that it's something that we don't do nowadays, but was used to pretty common back then. Posting a letter or a package with someone's first initial and their last name. Nowadays, we just post things with everyone's full first and last name. My best guess, I'm actually going to do a slightly dangerous thing here and Google and ask. My thought is it may have been an ink saving measure. Why did people address letters with only first initial? I usually type faster, but I have my keyboard in an odd angle when I stream. Potentially to say semi-anonymous, I suppose. No, that's for authors. Might need to do more proper research into that sometime, but for now, that is Sherlock Holmes and the Adventure of the Cardboard Box. It's funny that the mystery itself and the pursuit of it is really rather short, because we end up having just that first opening act is actually spent in Baker Street with that little tour de force, which almost seems to buy time. Then you have the middle area, which is the normal investigation, and the full third, which is the telling of the how and the where, but that could have been very much abridged. But in actuality, this was one of Doyle's more simple things, and the mechanic of just, it was a letter that was opened by the wrong party because two people with the same first initial formerly shared a residence, and it's just that simple. And from there, the rest of it is quite plain. But that will do that for that one, and we're going to have one last story for tonight. We now move to Sherlock Holmes and the Stockbroker's Clerk. Shortly after my marriage, I had bought a connection in the Paddington district. Old Mr. Farquhar, from whom I purchased it, had at one time an excellent general practice, but his age and an affliction of the nature of St. Victus's dance, from which he suffered, had very much thinned it. Is St. Victus's dance? It's dance disease. Sniden chorea, a neurological disorder characterized by rapid, uncontrollable, purposeless jerking motions. Not the same as Huntington's disease, but sometimes confused because they both involve chorea, involuntary dance-like movements. Old Mr. Farquhar, from whom I purchased it, had at one time an excellent general practice, but his age and an affliction of the nature of St. Victus's dance, from which he suffered, had very much thinned it. The public, not unnaturally, goes on the principle that he who would heal others must himself be whole, and looks askance at the curative powers of a man whose own case is beyond the reach of his drugs. Thus, as my predecessor weakened, his practice declined, until when I purchased it from him, it had sunk from $1,200 to little more than $300 a year. I had confidence, however, in my own youth and energy, and was convinced that in a very few years the concern would be as flourishing as ever. For 3 months after taking over the practice, I was kept very closely at work and saw little of my friend Sherlock Holmes, for I was too busy to visit Baker Street, and he seldom went anywhere himself, save upon the professional business. I was surprised, therefore, when one morning in June, as I sat reading the British Medical Journal after breakfast, I heard a ring at the bell, followed by the high, somewhat strident tones of my old companion's voice. "Ah, my dear Watson," said he, striding into the room. "I am very delighted to see you. I trust that Mrs. Watson has entirely recovered from all the little excitements connected with our adventure of the sign of 4. "Thank you, we are both very well," said I, shaking his hand warmly. "And I hope also," he continued, sitting down in the rocking chair, "that the cares of medical practice have not entirely obliterated the interest which you used to take in our little deductive problems." "On the contrary," I answered. "It is only last night that I was looking over my old notes and classifying some of our past results. I trust that you don't consider your collection closed." "Not at all. I should wish nothing better than to have some more such experience. Today, for example." "Yes, today if you like." "And as far off as Birmingham?" "Certainly, if you wish it." "And the practice?" "I do my neighbor's when he goes. He is always ready to work off the debt." "Ah, nothing could be better," said Holmes, leaning back in his chair and looking keenly at me from under his half-closed lids. "I perceive that you have been unwell lately. Summer colds are always a little trying." "I was confined to the house by a severe chill for 3 days last week. I thought, however, that I had cast off every trace of it." "So you have. You look remarkably robust." "Then how did you know of it?" "My dear fellow, you know my methods." "You deduced it, then?" "Certainly." "And from what?" "From your slippers." I glanced down at the new patent leathers which I was wearing. "How on earth—" I began, but Holmes answered my question before it was asked. "Your slippers are new," he said. "You could not have had them for more than a few weeks. The soles which you are at this moment presenting to me are slightly scorched. For a moment I thought they might have got wet and been burning in the drying, but near the instep there is a small circular wafer of paper with the shopman's hieroglyphs upon it. Damp would of course have removed this. You had been, therefore, sitting with your feet outstretched to the fire, which a man would hardly do even in so wet a June as this if he were at his full health." Like all of Holmes' reasonings, the thing seems simplicity itself when it was explained. He read the thought upon my features, and his smile had a tinge of bitterness. "I am afraid that I rather give myself away when I explain," said he. "Results without causes are much more impressive. You are ready to come to Birmingham, then?" "Certainly. What is the case?" "You shall hear it all in the train. My client is outside in a four-wheeler. Can you come at once?" "In an instant. I scribbled a note to my neighbor, rushed upstairs to explain the matter to my wife, and joined Holmes upon the doorstep. "Your neighbor is a doctor," said he, nodding at the brass plate. "Yes, he bought a practice as I did. An old established one. Just the same as mine. Both have been ever since the house were built." "Ah, then you got hold of the best of the two." "I think I did. But how do you know?" "By the steps, my boy. Yours are worn 3 inches deeper than his. But this gentleman in the cab is my client, Mr. Hall Pycroft. Allow me to introduce you to him. Whip up your horse, cabby, for we have just time to catch our train." The man whom I found myself facing was well-built, fresh-complexioned, and young, with a frank, honest face and a slight, crisp yellow mustache. He wore a very shiny top hat and a neat suit of sober black, which made him look what he was, a smart young city man, of the class who had been labeled cockneys, but who give us our crack volunteer regiments, and who turn out more fine athletes and sportsmen than any body of men on these islands. His round, ruddy face was naturally full of cheeriness, but the corners of his mouth seemed to be pulled down in a half-comical distress. It was not, however, until we were all in a first-class carriage and started upon our journey to Birmingham that I was able to learn what the trouble was which had driven him to Sherlock Holmes. "We have a clear run here of 70 minutes, Holmes remarked. "I want you, Mr. Hall Pycroft, to tell my friend your very interesting experience exactly as you have told it to me, or with more detail if possible. It will be of use to me to hear the succession of events again. It is a case, Watson, which may prove to have something in it, or may prove to have nothing, but which, at least, presents unusual and auteur features which are as dear to you as they are to me. Now, Mr. Pycroft, I shall not interrupt you again." Our young companion looked at me with a twinkle in his eye. "The worst of the story is," he said, "that I show myself up as such a confounded fool. Of course, it may work out all right, and I don't see that I could have done otherwise. But if I have lost my crib and get nothing in exchange, I shall feel what a soft Johnny I've been. I'm not very good at telling a story, Dr. Watson, but it is like this with me. I used to have a billet in Coxon Woodhouse of the Drapers' Gardens, but they were letting early in the spring, and through the Venezuelan loan, as no doubt you remember, came a nasty cropper. I'd been with them 5 years, and old Coxon gave me a ripping good testimonial when the smash came, but of course we clerks were all turned adrift. 27 of us, I tried here and tried there, but there were lots of other chaps in the same lay as myself, and it was a perfect frost for a long time. I'd been taking £3 a week at Coxon's, and I had saved about 70 of them, but I soon worked my way through that and out the other end. I was fairly at the end of my tether when, at last, I could hardly find the stamps to answer the advertisements, the envelopes to stick to them. I had torn out my boots, padding up to the office's airs, and I seemed just as far as getting a billet as ever. At last I saw a vacancy at Mawson and Williams, great stockbroking firm in Lombard Street. I dare say EC is not much in your line, but I can tell you that this is about the richest house in London. The advertisement was to be answered by letter only. I sent in my testimonial and application, but without the least hope of getting it. Back came an answer by return, saying that if I would appear next Monday, I might take over the new duties at once, provided that my appearance was satisfactory. No one knows how these things work. Some people say that the manager just plunges his hand into the heap, takes out the first one that comes. Anyhow, it was my innings that time, and I don't ever wish to feel better pleased. The screw was £1 a week raise, and the duties about the same as Coxon's. And now I come to the queer part of the business. I was in diggings out in Hampstead, like 17 Potter's Terrace. Well, I was sitting in doing a smoke that very evening, and after I'd been promised the appointment, when up came my landlady with a card that said Arthur Penfer, Financial Agent, written upon it. I never heard of the name before and couldn't imagine what he wanted with me, but of course I asked her to show him up. In he walked, middle-sized, dark-haired, dark-eyed, black-bearded man with a touch of shiny about his nose. He had a brisk kind of way with him and spoke sharply like a man who knew the value of time. "Mr. Hall Pycroft, I believe," said he. "Yes, sir," I answered, pushing a chair toward him. "Lately engaged at Coxon and Woodhouse's?" "Yes, sir." "And now on the staff of Mawson's?" "Quite so." "Well," said he, "the fact is that I have heard some really extraordinary stories about your financial ability. You remember Parker, who used to be Coxon's manager? He can never say enough about it." I was, of course, pleased to hear this. I had always been pretty sharp in the office, but I never dreamed that I would be talked about in the city in this fashion. "You have a good memory," said he. "Pretty fair," I answered modestly. "Have you kept in touch with the market while you've been out of work?" he asked. "Yes, I read the stock exchange list every morning." "Now that shows real application," he cried. "That is the way to prosper. You won't mind my testing you, will you? Let me see. How are the Ayrshires?" 106 1/4 to 105 7/8. The New Zealand Consolidated? 104. The British Broken Hills? 7 to 7 6. "Wonderful," he cried with his hands up. "This quite fits in with all I'd heard. My boy, you are very much too good to be a clerk at Mawson's." This outburst rather astonished me, as you can think. "Well," said I, "the other people don't quite think so much of me as you do, as you seem to, Mr. Pinner. I'd hardly enough fight to get this berth, and I'm very glad to have it." "Pooh, man, you should soar above it. You are not in your true sphere. I'll tell you how it stands with me. What I have to offer is little enough when measured by your ability, but when compared with Mawson's, it's light to dark. Let me see. When do you go to Mawson's?" "On Monday." "Ha ha. I think I would risk a little sporting flutter that you don't go there at all." "Not go to Mawson's?" "No, sir. Why, that day you will be the business manager of Franco Midland Hardware Company Limited, with 134 branches in the towns and villages of France, not counting one in Brussels and one in San Remo." This took my breath away. "I never heard of it," said I. "Very likely not. It has been kept very quiet, for capitals are privately subscribed. It was too good a thing to let into the public. My brother, Harry Pinner, is a promoter and joins the board after allotment as managing director. He knew I was in the swim down here and asked me to pick up a good man cheap, a young pushing man with plenty of snap about him. Parker spoke of you, and that brought me here tonight. I can only offer you a beggarly 500 to start with." "500 a year?" I shouted. "Only that in the beginning, but you are to have an overriding commission of 1% on business done by your agents, and you may take my word for it that this will come to more than your salary." "But I know nothing of hardware." "Tut, my boy, you know about figures." My head buzzed. I could hardly sit in my chair, but suddenly a little chill of doubt came upon me. "I must be frank with you," said I. "Mawson only gives me 200. Mawson's safe. Now, really, I know so little about your company that—" "Ah, smart," he cried, in a kind of ecstasy of delight. "You are the very man for us. You are not to be talked over, and quite right too. Now, there is a note for £100, and if you think we can do business, you may just slip it into your pockets as an advance upon your salary." "That is very handsome," said I. "When should I take over my new duties?" "Be in Birmingham tomorrow at once," said he. "I have a note in my pocket, which you will take to my brother. You will find him at 126B Corporation Street, wherein the temporary offices of the company are situated. Of course, he really must confirm your engagement between ourselves, and it will be all right." Really, I hardly know how to express my gratitude, Mr. Pinner. "Not at all, my boy. You have only got your deserts. There are one or two small things, mere formalities, which I must arrange with you. You have a bit of paper beside you there. Kindly write upon it, I am perfectly willing to act as business manager to the Franco Midland Hardware Company Limited at a minimum salary of £500. I did as he asked, and he put the paper in his pocket. There is one other detail, said he. What do you intend to do about Mossens? I had forgotten all about Mossens in my joy. I'll write and resign, said I. Precisely what I don't want you to do. I had a row over you with Mossens' manager. I had gone up to him to ask him about you, and he was very offensive. Accused me of coaxing you away from the service of the firm, and that sort of thing. Alas, I fairly lost my temper. If you want good men, then you should pay them a good price, said I. He would rather have our small price than your big one, said he. I'll leave you a fiver, said I, that when he has my offer, you'll never so much as hear from him again. Done. We picked him out of the gutter, and he won't leave us so easily. Those were his very words. The impudent scoundrel, I cried. I never so much as seen him in my life. Why should I consider him in any way? I shall certainly not write if you'd rather I didn't. Good, that's a promise, said he, rising from his chair. Well, I'm delighted to have got so good a man for my brother. Here's your advance of £100, and here's a letter. Make a note of the address, 126B Corporation Street, and remember, 1 o'clock tomorrow is your appointment. Good night, and may you have all the fortune that you deserve. I want to double check something. Okay, so he made a bet with Moss and manager that he could poach away. He could poach him away, yeah. That's just about all that has passed between us as near as I can remember. You can imagine, Dr. Watson, how pleased I was at such an extraordinary bit of good fortune. I sat up half the night hugging myself over it. And next day I was off to Birmingham in a train that would take me in plenty of time for my appointment. Took my things to a hotel in New Street. Made my way to the address that had been given to me. It was a quarter of an hour before my time, but I thought I would make no difference. 126B was a passage between two large shops which had led to a winding stone stair from which there were many flats as let offices for companies of professional men. The names of the occupants were painted on the bottom of the wall, but there was no such name as Franco Midland Hardware Company Limited. I stood for a few minutes with my heart in my boots, wondering whether the whole thing was an elaborate hoax or not, when a man came up to me and addressed me. He was very like the chap I'd seen the night before, same figure and voice, but was clean-shaven and his hair was lighter. Are you Mr. Hall Pycroft? Are you Mr. Hall Pycroft? He asked. Yes, said I. Oh, I was expecting you. But you're a trifle before your time. I had a note from my brother saying this morning in which he sang your praises very loudly. I was just looking for the offices when you came. We have not got our name up to it yet. We only secured these temporary premises last week. Come up with me. We will talk the matter over. I followed him to the very top of the lofty stair, and right there under the slates were a couple of empty, dusty little rooms, uncarpeted, uncurtained, into which he led me. I had thought of a great office with shining tables and rows of clerks such as I was used to, and I dare say I stared rather straight at the two deal chairs and one little table which had a ledger and a waste paper basket, and that was the whole of the furniture. Don't be disheartened, Mr. Pycroft, said my new acquaintance, seeing the length of my face. Rome was not built in a day, and we have lots of money at our backs, though we don't cut much dash yet in offices. Pray, sit down and let me have your letter. I gave it to him, and he read it over very carefully. You seem to have made a vast impression upon my brother, Arthur. And I know that he's a pretty shrewd judge. He swears by London, you know. and I buy Birmingham. But this time I shall follow his advice. Pray consider yourself definitely engaged. What are my duties? I asked. You will eventually manage the great depot in Paris, which will pour a flood of English crockery into the shops of 134 agents in France. The purchase will be completed in a week, and meanwhile you will remain in Birmingham and make yourself useful. How? For answer, he took a big red book out of a drawer. This is a directory of Paris, said he, with the trades and the names of the people. I want you to take it home with you and mark off all the hardware sellers with their addresses. It will be of greatest use to me to have them. Surely they're a classified list, I suggested. Not reliable ones. Their system is different from ours. To get it, let me have the list by Monday at 12. Good day, Mr. Pycroft. If you continue to show zeal and intelligence, you will find the company a good master. I went home to the hotel with the big book under my arm and very conflicting feelings in my breast. On the one hand, I was definitely engaged and £100 in my pocket. On the other, look at the offices and the absence of the name on the wall and other points which would strike as a businessman as a bad impression to the position of my employers. However, come what might, I had my money, so I settled down to my task. All Sunday I was kept hard at work, and yet by Monday I had only got as far as H. I went down to my employer, found him in the same dismantled kind of room. Was told to keep at it until Wednesday, and then come again. Wednesday I was still unfinished, so I am until Friday, that is yesterday. Then I brought it round to Mr. Henry Pinner. Thank you very much, said he. I fear I have underrated the difficulty of this task. This list will be of very material assistance to me. It took some time, said I. And now, said he, I want you to make a list of furniture shops, for they all sell crockery. Very good. And you can come up tomorrow evening at 7 and let me know how you're getting on. Don't overwork yourself. A couple of hours at Day's Music Hall in the evening would do you no harm after your labours. He laughed as he spoke, and I saw with a thrill that his second tooth upon the left side had been very badly stuffed with gold. Sherlock Holmes rubbed his hands together with delight, and I stared with astonishment at our client. You may, well, look surprised, Dr. Watson, but it is this way, said he. When I was speaking to the other chap in London, at the time that he laughed at am I not going to Mawson's, I happened to notice that his tooth was stuffed in this very identical fashion. Glint of gold in each case caught my eye, you see. When I put that with the voice and the figure being the same, things could be altered and changed with the razor of the wig. Could not doubt that it was the same man. Of course, you expect two brothers to be alike, but not that they would have the same tooth, stuffed in the same way. He bowed me out, and I found myself in the street, hardly knowing whether my head was on my head or my heels. Back I went to my hotel, put my head in the basin of cold water and tried to think it out. Why had he sent me from London to Birmingham? Why had he got there before me? Why had he written a letter for himself to himself? It was altogether too much for me. I could make no sense of it, and then suddenly struck me that what was dark to me might be very light to Mr. Sherlock Holmes. And I had just time to get up to town by night train to see him this morning to bring you both back with me to Birmingham. There was a pause after the stockbroker clerk concluded his surprising experience. Then Sherlock Holmes cocked his eye to me, leaning back on one of the cushions with a pleased yet critical face, like the connoisseur who has just taken the first sip of a Comet vintage. Rather fine, Watson, is it not? Said he. There are points in it which please me, and I think that you will agree with me that an interview with Mr. Arthur Pinner of the temporary offices of the Franco-Midland Hardware Company Limited would be a rather interesting experience for both of us. But how can we do it? I asked. Oh, easily enough, said Hall Pycroft cheerily. You are two friends of mine who want a billet, and what could be more natural that I should bring you both round to the managing director. Quite so, of course, said Holmes. I should like to have a look at the gentleman and see if I can make anything of his little game. What qualities have you, my friend, which would make your services so valuable? Or is it possible that... He began biting his nails and staring blankly out the window, and we hardly drew another word from him until we were at New Street. At 7 o'clock that evening, we were walking, the three of us, down Corporation Street to the company's offices. It's of no use being before on time, said our client. He only comes there to see me, apparently, for the place is deserted to the hour, up to the very hour that he names. That is suggestive, remarked Holmes. By Jove, I told you so, cried the clerk. That's he walking ahead of us there. He pointed to a smallish, dark, well-dressed man who was bustling along the other side of the road. As we watched him, he looked across at our boy who was bawling out the latest edition of the evening paper and running over among a dozen cabs and buses. He bought one from him. Then, clutching it in his hand, he vanished through a doorway. There he goes, cried Hall Pycroft. These are the company's offices into which he's gone. Come with me and I'll fix it up as easily as possible. Following his lead, we ascended 5 stories until we found ourselves outside a half-open door at which our client tapped. A thin voice bade us enter, and we entered a bare, unfurnished room such as Hall Pycroft had described. At the single table sat the man whom we had seen in the street, with his evening paper spread out in front of him. And as he looked up to us, it seemed to me that I had never looked upon a face which bore such marks of grief and of something beyond grief, of a horror such as comes to few men in a lifetime. His brow glistened with perspiration, his cheeks were the dull, dead white of a fish's belly, and his eyes were wild and staring. He looked at his clerk as though he failed to recognize him, and I could see by the astonishment depicted upon our conductor's face that this was by no means the usual appearance of his employer. You look ill, Mr. Pinner, he exclaimed. Yes, I am not well, answered the other, making obvious efforts to pull himself together and licking his dry lips before he spoke. Who are these gentlemen whom you've brought with you? One is Mr. Harris of Bermondsey, and the other is Mr. Price of this town, said our clerk glibly. They are friends of mine and gentlemen of expertise, and been out of place for some time, and they hope that you might find an opening for them in the company's employment. Possibly, very possibly, cried Mr. Pinner with a ghastly smile. Yes, I have no doubt that we shall be able to do something for you. What is your particular line, Mr. Harris? I'm an accountant, said Holmes. Ah, yes, we shall want something of the sort. And you, Mr. Price? A clerk, said I. I have every hope that the company may accommodate you. I will let you know about it as soon as we come to a conclusion, and now I beg that you will go. For God's sake, leave me to myself. These were the last words shot out of him, as though the constraint which he was evidently setting upon himself had suddenly and utterly burst asunder. Holmes and I glanced at each other, and Hall Pycroft took a step towards the table. You forget, Mr. Pinner, that I am here by appointment to receive some directions from you. Certainly, Mr. Pycroft, certainly, the other resumed in a calmer tone. You may wait here a moment, and there is no reason why your friends should not wait with you. I will be entirely at your service in 3 minutes, if I might trespass upon your patience a little longer so far. He rose with a very courteous air, and bowing to us, he passed out through a door at the farther end of the room, which closed behind him. What now? Whispered Holmes. Is he giving us the slip? Impossible, answered Pycroft. Why so? That door leads to an inner room. There is no exit. None. Is it furnished? It was empty yesterday. Then what on earth can he be doing? There is something which I do not understand in this manner. If ever a man was 3 parts mad with terror, the man's name is Pinner. What can have put the shivers on him? He suspects we are detectives, I suggested. That's it, cried Pycroft. Holmes shook his head. He did not turn pale. He was pale when we entered the room. It is just possible that his words were interrupted by the sharp rat-tat-tat of the direction of the inner door. "What the deuce is he knocking at his own door for?" cried the clerk. Again, and much louder, came the rat-tat-tat. We all gazed expectantly at the closed door. Glancing at Holmes, I saw his face turn rigid, and he leaned forward in intense excitement. Then suddenly came a low, gurgling sound. Gargling sound, and a brisk drumming upon woodwork. Holmes sprang frantically across the room and pushed at the door. It was fastened on the inner side. Following his example, we threw ourselves upon it with all our weight. One hinge snapped and then the other, and it came down with a crash. Rushing over it, we found ourselves in the inner room. It was empty. But it was only for a moment that we were at fault. At one corner, the corner nearest the room which he had left, there was a second door. Holmes sprang to it and pulled it open. Coat and waistcoat were lying upon the floor, and a hook from behind the door, with his own braces round his neck. Hanging the manager of the Franco Midland Hardware Company. His knees were drawn up, his head hung in a dreadful angle to his body, and the clatter of his heels against the door made the noise which had broken in upon our conversation. In an instant, I had caught him round the waist and held him up while Holmes and Pycroft untied the elastic bands which had disappeared between the livid creases of skin. Then we carried him into the other room, where he lay with a heavy, clay-colored face, puffing purple lips up and out with each breath, a dreadful wreck of all that he had been but 5 minutes before. "What do you think of him, Watson?" asked Holmes. I stooped over him and examined him. His pulse was feeble and intermittent, but his breathing grew longer, and there was a little shivering of his eyelids, which showed a thin white slit of ball beneath. "It has been touch and go with him," said I, "but he'll live now. Just open that window and hand me the water carafe." I undid his collar and poured cold water over his face, and raised and sank his arms until he drew a long, natural breath. "It is only a question of time now," said I, as I turned away from him. Holmes stood by the table, with his hands deep in his trouser pockets, with his chin upon his breast. "I suppose we ought to call the police in now," said he. "And yet I confess I'd like to give them a complete case when they come." "It's a blessed mystery to me," cried Pycroft, scratching his head. "Whatever they wanted to bring me all the way up here for, and then—" "Oh, well, that is clear enough," said Holmes impatiently. "It is this last sudden move." "You understand the rest, then?" "I think it is fairly obvious. What do you say, Watson?" I shrugged my shoulders. "I must confess I am out of my depths," said I. "Oh, surely, if you consider the events at first, they can only point to one conclusion." "Well, what do you make of them?" "The whole thing hinges upon 2 points. The first is of making Pycroft write a declaration by which he entered the service of this prosperous company. Do you not see how very suggestive it is?" "I'm afraid I missed the point." "Well, why did they want him to do it? Not as a business matter, of course. These arrangements are usually verbal, and there's no earthly business why it should be an exception. Don't you see, my young friend, that they were very anxious to obtain a specimen of your handwriting, and had no other way of doing it?" "And why?" "Quite so. Why? When we answer that, we have made some progress with our little problem. Why? There can be only one adequate reason. Someone wanted to learn to imitate your writing, and they had to procure a specimen of it. And now, if we pass on to that second point, we find each throws light upon the other. The point is that the request made by Pinner that you should not resign your place, but that you should leave the manager of this important business in the full expectation that a Mr. Hall Pycroft, whom he had never seen, was about to enter the office upon Monday morning. "My God," cried our client, "what a blind beetle I've been." Now you see the point about the handwriting. Suppose that someone turned up in your place who wrote with a completely different hand from that which you had applied for the vacancy. Of course, the game would have been up, but in the interval the rogue learned to imitate you, and his position was therefore secure, as I presume that nobody in the office had ever set eyes upon you. "Not a soul," groaned Pycroft. "Very good. Of course, it was of the utmost importance to prevent you from thinking better of it, and also to keep you from coming into contact with anyone who might tell you that your double was working in Mawson's office. Therefore, they gave you a handsome advance on your salary and ran you off to the Midlands, where they gave you enough to prevent you from going to London, where you might have burst their little game up. That is all plain enough." "But why should this man pretend to be his own brother?" "Well, that is pretty clear also. There are evidently only two of them in it. The other is impersonating you at the office. This one acted as your engager and found out that he could not find you an employer without admitting a third person into his plot. That he was most unwilling to do. He changed his appearance as far as he could and trusted that the likeness, which you could not fail to observe, would be put down to a family resemblance. But the happy chance of the gold stuffing, your suspicions probably never would have been aroused." Paul Pycroft shook his clenched hands in the air. "Good Lord," he cried. "What I've been fooled this way. What has this other old Pycroft been doing at Mawson's? What should we do, Mr. Holmes? Tell me what to do." "We must wire to Mawson's." "They shut at 12 on Saturdays." "Never mind. There may be some doorkeeper or attendant." "Ah, yes, they keep a permanent guard there on account of the value of the securities they hold. I remember hearing of it talked of in the city." "Very good. We shall wire to him and see if all is well, and if a clerk of your name is working there. That is clear enough. But what is not so clear is why, at the sight of one of us, that one of the rogues should instantly walk out of the room and hang himself." "The paper." The paper," croaked a voice behind us. The man was sitting up, blanched and ghastly, with returning reason in his eyes and hands which rubbed nervously at the broad red band which was still encircling his throat. "The paper, of course," yelled Holmes, as a paroxysm of excitement. "Idiot that I was. I thought he was so much of our visit that the paper never entered my head for an instant. To be sure, the secret must be there." He flattened it out upon the table, and a cry of triumph burst from his lips. "Look at this, Watson. It is a London paper, an early edition of the Evening Standard. Here is what we want. Look at the headlines. Crime in the City. Murder at Mawson and Williams. Gigantic attempted robbery. Capture of the criminal. Here, Watson, we are all equally anxious to hear. Kindly read it aloud to us." It appeared from its position in the paper to have been the one event of importance in the town, and the account of it ran in this way. A desperate attempt at a robbery, culminating in the death of one man and the capture of the criminal, occurred this afternoon in the city. For some time back, Mawson and Williams, the famous financial house, having been the guardians of securities which amount in the aggregate to a sum of considerably over £1 million sterling. So conscious was the manager of the responsibility which devolved upon him in consequence of the great interests at stake, that safes of the very latest construction have been employed, and an armed watchman has been left day and night in the building. It appears that last week a new clerk named Hall Pycroft was engaged by the firm. This person appears to have been none other than Beddington, the famous forger and cracksman who, with his brother, had only recently emerged from a 5-year spell of penal servitude. By some means which are not yet clear, He succeeded in winning under a false name this official position in the office, which he utilized in order to obtain molding of various locks and through a thorough knowledge of the position of the strong room and the safes. It is customary at Mawson's for the clerks to leave at midday on Saturday. Sergeant Tucson of the city police was somewhat surprised, therefore, to see a gentleman with a carpet bag coming down the steps at 20 minutes past 1. His suspicions being aroused, the sergeant followed the man, and with the aid of Constable Pollock succeeded, after a most desperate resistance, in arresting him. It was at once clear that a daring and gigantic robbery had been committed. Nearly £100,000 worth of American railway bonds with a large amount of scrip in other mines and companies was discovered in the bag. On examining the premises, the body of the unfortunate watchman was found doubled up and thrust into the largest of the safes, where it could not have been discovered until Monday morning had it not been for the prompt action of Sergeant Tucson. The man's skull had been shattered by a blow from a poker delivered from behind. There could be no doubt that Beddington had obtained entrance by pretending that he had left something behind him, and, having murdered the watchman, rapidly rifled the large safe, and then made off with his booty. His brother, who usually works with him, has not appeared in this job as far as at present can be ascertained, although the police are making energetic inquiries as to his whereabouts. "Well, we may save the police some little trouble in that direction," said Holmes, glancing at the haggard figure huddled up by the window. "Human nature is such a strange creature, Watson. You see that even a villain and murderer can inspire such affection that his brother turns to suicide when he learns that his neck is forfeited. However, we have no choice as to our action. The doctor and I will remain on guard, Mr. Pycroft, if you will have the kindness to step out for the police." And that is Sherlock Holmes, the storebroker's clerk. It's a little sad, I suppose, how timeless that story is. Even today, so many years after the writing of Sherlock Holmes, we have this type of job fraud happen, although in more technological methods nowadays. There have been various things done over the years, everything from the classic scams regarding people saying that you have a certain debt and must wire them via what is that darn untrackable financial thingy. I can't remember what it is, but that they say, oh, you need to send us a check from this money order thing. There have been uses of AI, like even more recently. People have done full-on AI forgeries on LinkedIn, made up these impersonations of people and gone through full interviews. I read a story a while back that someone was found out in a final interview because something seemed off, and the interviewer asked the person to wave their hand over their face. And the thing is, when you're doing a face tracking or face manipulation, this interrupts it, and the person refused to do so and then abruptly disconnected from the call. And obviously this is a older version of that, of not only getting a job, but then also getting access to what would be in those days, yes, financial institutions literally kept, like banks, the deposits and securities on site, and such as classic heists went. Very elaborate, certainly. And this one was more properly what I would call an adventure than some of the others, because there really wasn't much to be solved, per se. That it already came with all of the answers. We knew that both people that Pycroft had encountered were the same person by method of the gold billing, that even he knew that, even the client knew that. And it was just why, and everyone knew, all right, something's up, something's wrong. And it was all spelled out in the paper of, oh, well, this is clearly it. There really wasn't much deduction involved, and that even Holmes himself failed to catch it prior because he didn't clock the fact that the con artist was concerned by the paper and not him. Holmes didn't really do much here. And it's, I guess, sort of amusing, but it was still a very thrilling read in all those different ways. But those are going to be it for me today. So thank you to anybody who's been sticking around for a little bit. I do appreciate you all. I'm going to find you somebody to raid into. Let's see here. Who is up right now? It is rather late, but let's send you all to... By the way, as I do my looking, as always, you can follow here on Twitch and YouTube for viewing, and on Twitter and Blue Sky for my schedules and general happenings. I will be returning to Blueprints tomorrow, and then some Slay the Spire on Friday, and then a show with Savvy on early Sunday morning. It's being one of the first return shows that I'll be doing. She had asked me some time ago to have a chance to come back, and I'm at the point where after 5.5 years, I'm excited to be able to bring back folks and see what they're up to and have more engaged conversations, even though I get to catch up with people, more casually, and sometimes during my annual charity events. Being able to have a full, proper return episode is something that I've not really allowed myself, but I think after 5 years, it is time. And obviously, shows with new guests will still be happening, but I'm excited to have this become a new part and a new chapter in the proper installations of Vtuber Talk, as it were. Let's go to... Oh, I think this could be a fun one. Let me double check them. I'm going to send you all to Jen. She's playing... Can't actually tell which game, but anything but productivity is what it says, so should be fun. I hope you have a great rest of your day, evening time zone, everybody. And again, I appreciate anyone who's been here for any amount of time, whether you got here very early on and have lurked, or watching the VOD, if you are hearing my voice. The fact that you've spent time, and especially to be at this point in the streamer video, means quite a bit to me. So thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing you all next time.